and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and despite the dead rubber for the Demons and the Swans playing for a home final, the D's ground out an emphatic win to bolster their September credentials after booking a date with traditional rivals Collingwood in 10 days' time. Joining me tonight to discuss our victory over the Swans in the Harbour City, very refreshed from the week off from being managed last week, is long-time Demonlander George. Good evening, George.
Good evening, Andy. Was I subbed or managed? We'll never know. Good evening, Bin Man. Good evening to the Demonland listeners. Well, with this match being a dead rubber, as it turned out, let's all see if we can find out during the podcast how Andy's MFCSS was before the game, and then during the game, especially when the troops started to fall with injury. So let's get on with it.
Well, before I introduce our other co-host, the MFCSS before the game, I was very calm before the game because there wasn't any stakes besides the injury stakes, but we couldn't go up, we couldn't go down. I still want to win because you don't want to lose, you don't want to flirt with form or anything like that. But once the troops started going down, the MFCSS started rising, and we've got a question about that a bit later on. So I might save it up for then. But also joining us tonight, who's a man who loves to bring us all the stats that tell us why we won or why we lost, and in this week, why we won. So, B-Man, good evening to you.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, George. Good evening, Demonlanders. And Coach Andy has pulled me aside and said I've got to be a bit more disciplined with the time. I can't blame George for the show running mega long. So I've taken that on board, and I'm going to be hard at it and disciplined tonight. What a fantastic win. I wrote on Demonland that feeling, like I was sort of a bit ambivalent about the game too, and came into it, when they started coming back in the third quarter, I was thinking, how will we go here? And I was just blown away with that win. That was one of my most favourite wins, I think, for a long, long time. I wrote on Demonland that they just had such pride in the jumper. And there's a question about that period when we got back on top, but they could have so easily, not put the Q in the rack, but taken the easier path. And we'll talk about those stats. But I think that one of the things that I was thinking about today about that is during that period when we really dug in and said, no way, we're going to win this game. The D's are going to win this game. We don't lose games of football, which I just think just says so much about the culture that Simon Goodwin's built and the leadership that we've talked about a lot over the years, is that during that exact period is when Melksham got hurt. So they would have all known coming off the bench how serious that was. That was so evident to everyone, even though they hadn't been in breakout. And also Fritter was coming off. So the players would have, you would have been forgiven for thinking subconsciously in the back of their minds, we want to play finals. We don't want to get injured. Quite the contrary, like Track doubled down, and 𝗦cie, who was already playing an awesome game of footy, just seemed to will himself into the contest. And from a fan's perspective, it really made me proud to be a D's fan, and I just was up and about watching it by myself out the back, because it was in my mind, I'm thinking, these fellas have got fourth zone up, they've got pride to play for, and this is the level they're playing at. And I actually felt even a bit guilty in my mind about the thought, well, maybe we'll rest some players and take the foot off the accelerator. And I was just thrilled with the win, and I'd forgotten how good their record over us in the last sort of 10 years has been, because now that's 2 wins we've got back in our ledger. But yeah, I was just thrilled, and it makes a huge difference, I think, if you compare going into the finals and the momentum and the vibe that fans have got compared to Carlton, who have been up and about, but now going into the finals a bit limply, aren't they?
Yeah, exactly. And they were playing an opponent that had everything to gain by winning. I think Sydney had just as much to gain, although they couldn't drop out of the finals. A home final is massive. They had
more to gain. Well, as much home final SCG as opposed to playing in town and playing in Melbourne, albeit ridiculously at the MCG. But I think that's. Oh no,
Yeah.
Sorry, no, that's the other one I'm thinking of. But I exactly, and they had everything to play for, and they were terrific. I thought mostly the Swans.
All right, let's get into some housekeeping. Each week I ask our loyal listeners to help us out by leaving us a 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts. And as always, we do love the feedback. We really do appreciate it, and we'll read it out on the show. The 5 stars help boost the podcast. It gets more people listening to the show, and in turn it brings more people to Demonland, and therefore it may then lead to more contributions from more voices from our audience. So the best way you can help out the podcast is by boosting us in the form of these reviews or helping to spread the word to your Demon family members and friends. And before I get into the reviews, our 1-star reviewer from last week has adjusted their review to 5 stars, so a massive thank you and a shout out to PW Wingman. Appreciate that, mate. Blimit writes, how good is this podcast? Only discovered this pod last month, but certainly the best in-depth analysis of the Mighty D's. Not listening anymore to the so-called pundits, Buckley, Corns, Lloyd, etc. My only gripe is with George, who is a Tomo hater and Smith lover. I agree with Bimman that Smith should never be cast as a backman. So thanks for the review, Blimit. George, any response to that comment?
Yeah, Tomo will be out this week.
George used to be a Smith hater too, but he's on board the train.
𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁 writes, love the interview with Jake. As a former subject teacher of Jake, I've always followed his career. The fact that he came across to Melbourne has made us a better football team. The things that you guys are seeing are characteristics he has had as young as 16 and 17 years old. His hunger and focus to succeed are finally being noticed by all so-called experts. Well, I would like to say thank you to Goody in believing in him. Well done, guys. Go D's. Thank you, 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁. We're absolutely devastated for Jake, and we'll talk more in depth about him a little bit later on in the show. He really was a great interview, and I'm all the more gutted having just had that chat with him last week. He was very generous with his time. He was very open and honest about him missing out in 2021 and then keeping his chin up whilst grinding it out at 𝗚cie. Eventually wins his spot back, and he's been a massive contributor to our season this year and our charge towards finals. We're going to miss him greatly, and I highly recommend taking a listen to the interview. His description of his match-winning clutch goals against the Lions is fantastic, and it was one of the magnificent highlights from this home and away season. So if you can, check that out on either on our YouTube channel or whichever podcast app you're listening to now. It should be the show before this one. Jester666 writes, better late than never. Absolutely love the pod. It's my favourite time of the week. Being a proud South Australian Demon member, I can't get to as many games as I would like. And whether it's a win or a loss, it's good to hear your expert analysis and breakdown of the game while I'm busy working, and it definitely makes the morning go quicker. Also love your interviews, Andy. Hopefully we can get more of those in the future. Love the content, love the effort you all put in. And most of all, I love my Ds. Bring on the finals. Thank you and keep up the great work. Well, thanks for that great review, Jester. I love doing the interviews. You can check them all out, as said, on our YouTube channel or via demonland.com/interviews. Or whichever podcast app you're listening to now. This year, we've been fortunate enough to interview, we've done Brodie Grundy, Demons high performance manager Selwyn Griffith, rising star Judd McVie, premiership fullback Stephen May, Demons defensive coach Troy Chaplin, and last week, Jake Melksham. So check those out on YouTube or on Demonland. There are also a heap of other interviews with other Demon players and officials, past and present. So there are a lot of ex-Demon players from the 80s and 90s and 2000s that you can enjoy listening to. It's time for another, writes, the only pod for D's true believers. Don't bother going anywhere else if you're a Demons diehard fan who wants a totally biased, but of course totally fair, discussion of all things Melbourne Football Club on a week-to-week basis. Presented by the three wise men, Andy representing the typical Demon fan with decades of MFC-imposed psychological scars for all to see, Bimman with the best research and most in-depth statistical analysis you'll get anywhere, and George, the elder voice of reason. Well, thank you. It's time for another. That's a great review from a very regular Demonlander. Keep the feedback coming. Please give us that 5-star on Apple Podcasts. As I said, we absolutely do appreciate it. And don't forget to click the write a review link and write that review, as well as giving us the 5 stars, and we'll read it out on the show. If you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or Threads, and you want to leave us feedback or post a question or a comment for the show, you can post under our podcast post each week or just slide into our DMs. We won't read out your full name on the show. Now, in addition to being available on Apple, Google, Spotify, SoundCloud, and all your preferred podcasting apps, the Demonland podcast is now available to be watched and listened to on YouTube. Just search for the Demonland podcast to find our channel. You'll be able to view the podcast with our cartoon likenesses displayed when each of us are talking. And as always, if you want to chat with other Demons fans and you've never been down to demonland.com, just head there, sign up. You can chat with other Demon fans from across Australia and around the world. It's completely free. In addition to being able to post the questions or comments for the show, there's so many topics and threads discussing all things Demons related. So come on over, join up, and you can get chatting with other Demons fans. If you'd like to join us tonight on the show and you want to talk about any of the topics we're going to talk about, give us a call on 03 9016 3666, 03 9016 3666. I'll answer, I'll put you on mute, I'll bring you on when there's a break in the conversation. So if I pick up and you hear us chatting, just wait until you hear me say welcome to the podcast. If you want to, during the week, if you want to call that number, you can leave us a message and we will play it on the show. If you're listening to us live now, head on over to the chat room, demonland.com/podcast. We're live every Monday, so if you want to listen to the show live, head on over to demonland.com on Monday nights at 8:30 p.m. I didn't mention this at the top of the show, and I should have, but we will be live next Monday. Even though it's a pre-finals bye, we'll be back. We'll be discussing next week's match against Collingwood. So tonight we're just going to talk about the Swans game. We'll do an extended preview show next week where we'll discuss changes and the key matchups, as well as taking a look at the road ahead that could lead us once again to the promised land. So no pre-finals bye for the Demonland podcast. We'll be back next week. So that's why we won't be previewing next week's match tonight. Well, I'll quickly get into the match wrap-up. The D's fate for the first week of the finals was sealed before the ball was bounced in anger, but the Swans' destiny was still up for grabs and they had everything to play for, with the reward being a home final in the Harbour City. Few would begrudge the D's if they had chosen to coast at half-wrap power in order to avoid injury and rest valuable personnel. Despite a sloppy first half where the D's were clearly not playing at their best and the Swans were wasteful in front of goal, the D's went into the main break 8 points up. After halftime, the Swans came out full of fire and within 5 minutes had piled on 3 goals. Their fourth on the trot was at the 16-minute mark of the third quarter, and that took them out to an 18-point lead, and it seemed as if the Swans would run away with the match. But these Demons were on a mission, and when the match demanded a lift in tempo, our leaders stepped up to the plate. With a tag on Clayton Oliver hampering his output for the second week in a row, it was up to Christian Petracca to start the fight back and right the ship. The Swans then targeted Track, but once he had got going, his ship was unsinkable, and it also released the moorings of Clary. Track's racked up the 29 disposals, 17 contested, 6 score involvements, 4 clearances, 2 inside 50s and a goal, whilst after Clary's quiet start, he amassed 26 disposals, 10 contested, 8 inside 50s, 4 clearances and 4 score involvements. Jack Viney continued his stellar season, which has now netted him a spot in the All-Australian squad with 29 disposals, 14 contested, 7 inside 50s, 4 score involvements and 3 clearances. It was a welcomed return for Bayley Fritsch after 7 weeks on the sideline with a foot injury, but D's fans' hearts would have been inside their mouths as he's hobbled off the ground. But it was a welcome sight to see him return to the field of play later on to boot some beautiful last quarter iconic snaps for goal, bringing his total to 5 for the match. However, the day was marred by some carnage on the SCG as veteran Demon Jake Melksham also hobbled from the field after an innocuous stumble. With an ACL injury now confirmed, Jake's hopes for a second chance at glory are now dashed, which is devastating for him and for Demon fans. Down back, the addition of Daniel Disco Turner brought some stability to the defence. Despite a couple of fumbles, and he wasn't the only culprit on the day, he played and executed the D's much-vaunted zone defence very well in just his third senior game. As listeners to these podcasts know full well, having a third tall who plays that position well releases both Stephen May and Jake Lever to do what they do best. Stephen May ended the day with 21 disposals, 10 intercepts, 6 marks, 3 spoils and 550 metres gained. The D's now have a 10-day break to reset for their shot at the minor premiers, the Magpies, with a free hit to snag a home preliminary final and I, for one, cannot wait. George, anything you want to add about the match?
Yeah, I thought this was a fascinating match from one perspective, and that was what the coach has talked about so many times since he's been established as the Melbourne football coach, and that's establishing a premiership winning game style and the team to play that way. Sydney have an absolutely fantastic record of getting into finals. They've been in the finals 22 of the last 27 years. It's just incredible. And won 2 premierships, one under Paul Roos and one under Longmire. Interestingly, the apprentices of Paul Roos, and in particular Ross Lyon, has been in 9 final series and has 0 premierships. So what I saw in this game in particular was the 2 different styles at play, and I don't think the Swans under Longmire, and I don't think the Saints under Lyon will progress all that very far, and unless they change their game style. It's what Geelong did last year to win a premiership. This idea of all-out defence and hang into the game, hoping that you're within striking range at the end, just doesn't win premierships, and that's the name of the game. We played their style of game. We overcame their style of game in this match, and then we blew them away. And that's what's happened exactly to the Swans in the grand final last year against an ageing Geelong team, which has now hit the wall themselves. But it's the different game style. It's a game style that was introduced by Richmond in, 2016, 17. We've emulated it, we've perfected it, but there still are a couple of coaches who are still hanging on to the old style. Like I said, it gets you into finals, but it doesn't get you any further. And this was a game that really showed that. So that's what I really took out of this match.
The Swans were pretty impressive, though. I thought in terms of their pressure and their tackle. I mean, that's why they always trouble teams, isn't it? Because when they're on, they play old school football, like you said. I mean, my feeling is on what you're saying there, George, is their weakness is the same as Port's, but not as dramatic in the sense that they're stronger defensively, but Longmire still hasn't implemented the full zone defence, the sophisticated zone defence that Melbourne use. And you would have heard on the call, they mentioned it a few different ways, or, the grid defence, or, that ability to cover the ground and control the opposition's, even the direction they move the ball. There was a bit of play that summed up Melbourne's strategy brilliantly at one point. The commentators noted on it, it was like soccer. Like they wanted to progress the ball down the ground. They were keen to get going, but we fought, they needed to get going. I think it was in the last quarter. They needed to get a score on the board to get the back in the match. And we forced them to kick back into their own 50 zone, in their defensive 50, 20, 30 metre kick backwards after we just didn't allow them any space. We don't play very often at the SCG. I think that's the first time we've played there for 4 or 5 years, but it perfectly suits Melbourne's game plan. And the game looked very much how I thought it would, which is like an old school. When I say old school, it looks like how that game looked very much like how we played in 21 and for the first half of 22. That ability to control the opposition's ball movement, basically play, take time to get it back to our terms. And when we do, like you said, we roll over the top of teams. And partly, there's a question about that our fast finishing, and that's all related. It's all part of the strategy. And I actually thought that comment about it's like soccer was quite interesting, because I said that last week on the show, George, that in some ways I feel like Goody, the other coaches often have a game plan and then they roll out their game plan. And Goody has a game plan too, but for all the criticisms he's received over the year for being stubborn and, not being flexible, I'd argue he's almost the most flexible this year in terms of tactically, because we've got multiple ways of playing, but it seems like more and more he looks at like a coach and he like a soccer coach or a manager, he allows the opposition to set how the game looks and then responds. And then we get it on our terms. And it's a bit like, maybe an analogy there would be boxing. Once we've worked them out a little bit, we start grinding, and we grind and grind and grind. And then we kick away. That's been the pattern. I thought he had a great day in the box tactically. There was a couple of things, and we'll talk about them, but their pressure was fantastic, I thought, through the game. And geez, if I could pick a player from another team to come to Melbourne, I'd just pick Goulden in a heartbeat. I mean, what a player, what a beautiful kick he's got. And, I think that's the other old school thing that they've got to a degree, George, is that a bit like Clarkson, he's back in the day in Hawthorn, his reliance on those really incisive kickers. And if you can take them away a little bit, although we didn't with Goulden, and I think it's an interesting question tactically. I don't think we look to put time into him.
Well, I was just about to ask you that question. I know we don't like to put tags on, hard tags, maybe because it was a dead rubber as well, but we really just let him run riot. No one was anywhere near him. We just let him go wherever he wanted. And I don't think you can do that. I don't think you have to put a hard tag on him, but we put no time into him. And yes, it might have been the dead rubber aspect of the nature of the game. But
well, it's an interesting question, though, Andy, because someone wrote that on Demonland today, and like I wasn't being facetious. I said, "Well, try a thought experiment.
Yep.
Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that Goodwin is aware of the pros and cons of putting time into Goulden, and for whatever reason elects not to, and we go on to win the game. What might those reasons be? I mean, Goulden was clearly their best player. 42 career high, 42 disposals.
He's fantastic.
Sessions, 9 score involvements and 4 clearances. That's a hell of a game. But I heard 𝗟𝗍 interviewed beforehand, right before the game, on 3AW, and he was asked about, do you have plans to put time into Goulden? And he said, and it was in context of McGuinness tagging Oliver, and that, have they got plans for if someone tags Oliver this week? And he mentioned Mills might go to him, and I think that's what happened. But 𝗟𝗍 talked about, we can move that player around. And with Goulden, I think they let him go. I mean, you say why? So the problem is you give up a player if you run with him. And,
yeah, sure.
And like George will talk about it later, but that sophisticated zone defense is sophisticated because everyone has to know exactly where they're going to be on the ground. If you're going to run a player with Goulden, who runs from the halfback flank all the way down the ground, you're dragging someone out of that ability to cover off the all-team defense in the zone. So, I mean, my assumption is they, will have done their pros and cons, and Goody's done that a lot, is let really damaging players rack up the ball, and until they start putting scoreboard pressure on it, I mean, what do we keep them to? We kept them to what?
7 goals.
Yeah. So, I mean, what damage did he do? Like you say, we need to put time into him. Why? We won the game and kept them to 7 goals. I mean, so that's how Goody would have thought about it. They would have been tracking him, and at any stage, maybe think about how do you put time in him. But we don't really have a natural player who would go with him. And anyone who's got the ability, speed-wise, to go with Goulden, you're taking him out of the high half forward role or the half back flank role, or you're taking a Sparrow, or you're giving up too much. Would be, I assume is why they didn't put time into him.
He scored 2 goals out of a grand total of 7. But look at the rest of the ground. That's the important thing. That both 𝗟𝗏 and McDonald, their 2 main tall forwards, kicked 1 goal.
Yeah,
that's what I was talking about before.
With some wayward kicking as well.
No. Sorry?
With some wayward kicking as well. They could have put on bigger scores.
Yeah, but
we still won that game on an expected score, not by much, but a couple of points. But I mean, that's I think that if he was doing more damage, they would have sent someone to him, not just as a reference, not as a tag, but they would have definitely, sent someone to him. But I think that's what I was talking about last week, George. That response by about McGuinness that Goodwin was criticised for, that he's not looking to get the ball, wasn't about McGuinness. It was about the fact that philosophically, Goodwin doesn't like tagging because you lose one of your 22 players who are on the field. And then if you've got a system that relies on everyone playing a specific role, you're basically taking someone out of that role, and someone else has got to cover their kilometres on the ground in terms of running, defensive spread and that sort of stuff. So leaving that aside, I just love watching him play. He is an absolute gun, and that goal that he kicked from the centre square was, it was a thing of beauty.
All right, big man, get into your stats files. Take it away.
So interesting game on a lot of levels, and sort of picking up what George was saying. The Delightful D pointed this out in the stats file thread on Demonland, that a real strength of the Swans is their tackling, and that sort of old school. They put a lot of emphasis on high tackle, high pressure, contested ball. I mean, all teams do. Let's face it, but that's the sort of DNA of the Swans is their tackling. So I thought it was brilliant that we were +3 in tackles on the day in a game where they had a lot more on in terms of playing for a home final. Was the difference of how far they're going to progress in this final series. They have some chance of progressing out of week one, you'd think, if they play the SCG. So +3 for tackles was phenomenal. Just on that point that I was making before, I've talked about this all season, but and last year and the year before, is our kicking is not our strength, nor is our clean ball handling. We don't, even if our best players track fumbles a little bit, it's been a pattern. But our kicking efficiency was 58.9 for the day. There was a 67. That's a big difference in a high pressure game. So 67% of their kicks hit the target. We were +400 odd, 416 for metres gained. Inside 50, +7. So they worked really hard to keep at us all game. +7 for us is not a big margin. I think it was, what was it last week, +30 or something last week, or 15. Let's contested possessions tracked pretty evenly all day, except they were in front 2 or 3, 4 or 5. I think it got out as much as 6 or 7 at one point. But it was only +3 at the end. So they stuck to their guns all day, as long Maya said in his post-match presser. Ground ball gets, we were -9, so that was impressive. That was much higher at one point. So that was a very strong comeback in the last quarter and a half to get our ground ball gets near parity. Intercepts a big part of our game. We 79 to 73, so +6 for intercepts. We had +8 for intercept marks, and so really that's Lever and May both playing really well. But back this centre clearances, we were dead even 10 each. Stoppage clearances +3. I'll come back to that when we talk about that. There's a question about the numbers at the stoppages later, but that's a really impressive number, +3. Given that we go in with allowing the opposition extras at our stoppages. Contested marks, I was really surprised at this number. They were +2 for contested marks. Was dead on even 12 marks inside 50 each. +18 for hitouts, which was curious. I don't know the time on ground for 𝗪cie, but I would have thought, just watching the game, it would have been higher than that. But only +18. Only +2 hitouts to advantage. So that, given how well we did in stoppages comparatively, I thought that was quite interesting. We were +3 for tackles inside 50. So again, our forward half pressure has been a lot better last year. This year it was a weakness of ours last year. This is a fantastic number. Defensive one-on-one, we only lost 12.5% of our defensive one-on-ones. To their 36%. So that's a huge differential. We really got a hold of them defensively. Our defense worked an absolute charm, and I just loved watching it. It just felt like a Melbourne game. It was just like putting on a warm pair of gloves, because it just looked like a recognisable DNA for the Ds. And I think Disco Turner, they all did their job. They all did their jobs fantastically. I really was thrilled with Bowie's game. He's had it down 2 or 3 weeks, and I thought he was fantastic. Pressure was interesting. This surprised me, actually. They were 182 in the first quarter. That didn't surprise me, but we're only 172. I thought we started better. In fact, I thought this was our best start to a game for the last 2 or 3 weeks, but our pressure wasn't quite there. We brought it up 185 in the next, but they took it up to 199. Then after half time, they came out and they blitzed. So this one was interesting, because it felt like we were a bit slow coming out on the back foot, and maybe. But I watched the replay. I watched the first 3 quarters today. Watching it on replay is that this marries up with this data, and I hadn't seen this yet, but they were 214 in that quarter for pressure, which is unbelievable. And we were 198. And so watching it again on the second time, actually we didn't really come out like we weren't switched on in that second half. So I got the first quarter and the third quarter wrong, I think. we kept going, 192 to 193. It was 187, 197 for the match. So that for the match, 197 to them, that's a really high pressure game. It felt that way. I think the SCG, the way they measure these pressure points, the SCG, the tight confines, is almost invariably going to be a high pressure game to a degree because there's so little space to run into. Clayton Oliver, I mentioned a couple of weeks ago, his pressure points, 85 points against the Blues, was the highest for the season. He got 86 in this game. So number one, not bad for a player just coming back from a hamstring. So 37 pressure acts, 12 more than the next. 11 more than the next, which was Nibbler. Jack Viney had the second most pressure points, 69. His season average 56. Nibbler, another fantastic game, particularly from a pressure perspective. His season average is 45 points, 45.7. He was 63 pressure points in this game. Rounding out the next two, the top six was Gus, again above his season average for pressure point with 21 acts. And 𝗟𝗍, who copped a bit of stick on the Demonland boards, and I'll be interested to know your guys' take on his game. And I know we've got a question. He actually had 21 pressure acts as well for 44 points, well above his season average of 31. So a really important game from a pressure perspective. Time in forward half, big number for Melbourne. This was really interesting because we couldn't get the game back on our terms, and I've used that rowing analogy of keeping going and getting your rating up, but they really pushed hard in that first quarter despite our pressure being down with 55-45. We really upped that in the second quarter. 61% of the time the ball was in our front half to 39%. But that third quarter they really used that territory that they gained from the pressure that they came out with. 57-43, got the game well and truly back on their terms until we lifted our ratings again. And then the last quarter was 56-44. So the match was 53-47. Melbourne would like it 60-40, but, they're a good team, a good contested team. So a good effort there. We're plus 15 points from stoppage scores. Huge, absolutely huge. Plus 26 from turnover. If I've mentioned before, turnover is our key way of scoring. It's more important than stoppages because you get more opportunities, you get more turnover opportunities. So you've got to score from them. So 26 points, plus 26 for turnover. We had 52 in total, which is fantastic. And just the last thing I thought was interesting was centre bounce, ruck attendances. 𝗟𝗲𝗀𝘀𝘁𝗏 van Rooyen, he had 25 ruck contests. That's a lot at this stage of the season for a young fella. I don't know what the time on ground was for 𝗪cie, but he had 50 ruck contests above his season average. So 55.3 is his season average. He went to 60% of the ruck contest. Rui, whose average is 13% ruck contest, he went to 30% of the ruck contest. And a lot of that was he took all of the forward half, I think. He didn't a ruck contest. So, but big, that's a big ask for a young fella. So it goes to the question that we'll leave for next week. But,
And he performed magnificently, 15 hit-outs, and 𝗪𝗍𝗀 only had 17 for the whole game. So, it was a fantastic performance from him, and I think he had 80% game time as well, which is a fair amount of work for a 20-year-old.
Yeah, and 5 of his 15 hit-outs, George, went to advantage.
Yeah,
and that's pretty good because he's rucking against 𝗪𝗍𝗀 a lot of that time up forward. He's got a pretty good tap work. They worked on that all last year. He was often rucking at Casey. I thought that was really impressive. Joel Smith took 1 hit out. A couple of curious things. The expected score was 85-81, so we won by 4 points. What was our real margin again?
21 points.
21 points. So, they did leave a lot on the table there, which was unusual for the most accurate team in the AFL. So, again, how much of that is our pressure? Some statistically, it was a bit of a muddling game from that perspective. We worked really hard to get it on our terms, and when we did, that's when we got the time in forward half and we got our turnover games going. The other thing was that we had, who was it? Hunter went to a centre bounce appearance, which was kind of weird seeing him in there. And there was one more curious one who went to a centre. Lockie Hunter's Rivers. He went to 5. centre bounce attendances.
That they said before the game, apparently, that he was going to take more centre bounce attendances, and I guess that was just to probably rest some of the stars. They probably knew if the game was sewn up, they'd take off like we did Track and the rest and Oliver.
And I think they've done that really, really well. A lot of kudos needs to go to Goody, but also the high performance team and the way they've used the bench. George talked about this a lot last year in terms of using the bench to manage loads. And they've clearly been doing that over the last number of weeks, including in this match. 𝗍𝗲 had 9 centre bounce appearances. I was really surprised when I saw that number because I can't really recall him having that many.
He stayed in there for much longer periods. Compared to, it's always been one bounce at the start of quarters sort of thing. But I thought it was something that Goody was actually playing with during the whole game because he had other unusual things like he had A and B up on the wing for a good period. That was interesting. 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁 taking the kickouts.
𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁's been taking kickouts quite a lot this year.
Yeah, but he was doing a lot more than normally it's Stephen May. But I thought overall all these strange things were interesting during the game when people criticising for not making changes and tactical moves.
Well, I don't know if these. I don't know if these are tactical moves to try out for finals. I think it was more from a player management perspective. Gawn only had 75% time on ground. And that's why you saw Rui doing more rucking, and that wasn't to get Rui rucking experience, which it does naturally, but that was more to preserve Max, I would assume.
And I just realised, I now realise why I can't remember 𝗍𝗲 being to that. He went to 2. It was 9%.
9%. There you go. I was going to say 9.
Trent Rivers only went to 1, not 5. Lachie Hunter went to 1. And the Ruinator, he went to 4, which was 18%. But
you
still,
are fired.
I was going to, my eyes weren't deceiving me. I think, George, in terms of Nibbler going to the wing is to chop out, because they did that last week, and they rotated Laurie as well to give Hunter and Langdon a chop out. So I suspect their time on ground was probably lower than it has been. But that's part of that sort of high running rotation, I think. So they did that a couple of times last week, actually, having Nibbler on the wing. And shout out to Nibbler. What a game. I know there's a question for him. So, yeah, it was a fantastic performance. I'd really like to highlight, though, the pressure for a third week in a row from Oliver. I know he had a down week last week, but he still put pressure on, coming straight back into the team high pressure acts against the Blues. Another high pressure game 2 weeks later against the Swans in his team high pressure. That's a young fella who just wants to have an impact. And again, I just can't believe how often, I say it and think it, but to have Petracca, 𝗍𝗀 and Oliver and 𝗪𝒀 as a starting lineup in the centre, should we choose to have it, is I just pinch myself and think it's just ridiculous. And I mean, I guess at some stage we might talk about the All-Australian. But
yeah, well, I've got that marked down just right after a question, so we'll talk about that. Langdon and Hunter 94 and 92% time on ground, respectively.
Right. But and I don't know what you guys think about Hunter, but I was really curious. It's that you get a good vox box on the Demonland in terms of getting a feel. There was a fair bit of criticism for Hunter.
He's copped it all. He's copped it all
watching
year,
the game, thinking it's like he's been a Demon ever since I started watching footy. He's fantastic. I just love the way he goes about it. He gut runs from box to box in soccer terminology. He's unbelievable, isn't he, George?
The thing that I think people really miss about Hunter is that he wins his own ball.
Oh, doesn't he?
And people criticising him for his disposals, perhaps, but he's winning much more ball than other people would otherwise be winning. So he's adding more to our attacking move simply because he's a better player. He's under high pressure constantly in the roles that, especially when he's winning contested ball. So yeah, people need to look a little bit further than just his kicking style or what other players might be doing in the side. But yeah, he's becoming an integral cog in the lineup, and he's relieved the situation where the people like the A and Bs don't need to run up and down the ground as much because Hunter's already got it covered on his side.
That's right. That's exactly right.
507
all the
metres
kilometres
gained
that need to be run in a game of footy to do the defensive zone that we've been talking about, that you'll talk a bit about later. Between Nibbler, Chandler, and Langdon and Hunter, they're probably 40% of the total clicks that have to be run in a game. And so I think, any criticism of his or any of those players, to be honest, Langdon included, Nibbler included, of their disposal efficiency, at least needs to be factored in how much running they do. Not 90% of the time on the ground, running 16, 17 kilometres a game, 4 or 5 of those kilometres at a fast clip. That's going to challenge anyone's ability to kick a footy or handball it. It's not like, the old days where half forward flank runs 2-3 kilometres and every time they kick the footy, they're fresh as. So, I thought he was fantastic yesterday, and I thought Langdon, is looking great as well. So, they're all looking very fit and very strong.
507 metres gained for Lockie Hunter. So I think 4th or 5th highest on the field. So, well, why don't we get into our listener questions? We start with the Melksham injury, which then flows into the forward line conundrum that we keep having each week. Scroll says the Melksham injury was devastating. He's been a huge part of keeping our decimated forward line together in the absence of Fritsch, Brown, McDonald and Petty. I just feel gutted for him, even more so given he missed out of 2021. Given the recovery time and his age, I can't help think he may hang up the boot. Just a week ago, he would have been a lock to go around next season. Track Forever says, guys, once again, thank you for an amazing job you do. 5-star rating from me. If Melksham is out, what will we miss most is the negating role he plays on opposition key backs. Who do you think can play that role now? Demon WA adds, the milkshake injury is super hard to take, opens the door up for one of T-Mac, Ben Brown or Grundy, you'd think. Supreme Demon says, if the sad news is confirmed and Jake Melksham is injured with an ACL, who replaces him? Tom McDonald, who kicked 5 goals for 𝗙cie in the VFL, or should Brodie Grundy, who kicked 3 goals and had 35 disposals in the VFL too, get another chance against his former side, the Magpies? Go Lordy says, it's been a strife-ridden year in our forward 50. Ben Brown, T-Mac, Fritter and Petty all go down at various times, and just when Melky steps up and looks like the answer, he goes down too. Fortunately, we had a sort of sliding door moment because Fritter stepped in just as Melky stepped out, but then it looked like Fritter had re-injured his foot and it all went pear-shaped for a moment or two. When you throw in the agony surrounding Grundy in the forward line and our period of goal-kicking yips, I think we all have to applaud the efforts of Greg Stafford this year. Despite all these problems in the forward 50, we keep winning. Is he a miracle worker? Should he be beautified? And how does Saint Gregory of the forward line sound? All we need now is a statue with weeping eyes. Go D's. Red and Blue Rising says, well done on a great podcast. Looking forward to the finals edition, at least another 3. My question is, without Melky in the side playing so brilliantly as a defensive forward, who also kicks goals, could Joel Smith play his role as he has defensive capabilities and is talented up forward? I feel we really need this type of player forward as it's a weapon to be able to shut down the opposition interceptors. And finally, Rue Beauty says, absolutely gutted for Jake. I listened to your brilliant interview with him and discussing playing on next year. Looks like the career is over. Such a sad way to finish up. Unfortunately, in all professional sport, you have to move on quickly and we need to find a replacement. Who else could play that important negating role? So before we get into the forward line, let's take a moment to wish Jake Melksham a speedy recovery. He's really stepped up this season in the absence of many of our forwards. He kicked 20 goals, 11 in his 13 games. I'm absolutely gutted for him, as I said before. George, and then B-Man, before we talk replacements, is there anything you'd like to say about Jake and his contribution this season?
Oh, it was absolutely devastating. When I first saw it, I thought, well, hopefully it's just a pinched nerve or something like that. It was so innocuous, the actual injury. And then, of course, and then when he walked around the boundary line afterwards, I thought, oh, maybe it's not too bad. But unfortunately, the scans today confirmed that it was the ACL, and it's put his career really right in the focus. he's 32 years of age, I think, for next year, and given that all next year now will be out of the question, it's probably put his career right in the crosshairs, unfortunately, which is sad. We'll talk about the replacements and things like that, but we're everything that we were critical about Melksham earlier on in the season and towards the end of last year, he really has fixed up. The pressure that he's been applying to the defenders has been exceptional. His kicking has been even better, particularly as those goals from the boundary line around the corner. His positioning has been so much better. Where earlier in the season he was looking for the cheapies out at the back. Now he's competing in the air and he's competing on the ground, which is all part of what Melbourne requires in the forward line. So, yeah, it was just tragic. We will really miss him. The very fortunate thing is it's the week that Bayley Fritsch came back. So they're not like-for-like replacements. It would have been better having both of them in there, but at least we've got our highest goal scorer coming back into the side right as we enter the final series.
It's just awful. I hate to see any player get injured like that, like hamstring to the opposition. I can deal with that, but it was so evidently a big problem, wasn't it? It wasn't like one of those, incidents that you think, oh, maybe there's some doubt. Like, it just buckled in such a weird way, and no one around him, and he's been awesome. I really, really loved your interview with him, Andy, and there were a couple of things that in hindsight now are quite sad. Like, he's talking about the going on next year. He was going to play on. That's all up in the air, of course. I heard on the radio today there was talk that he was thinking about retiring mid-season, which I'd not heard before. So the other thing was, I really liked his response to your question about a defensive forward, and that he was saying essentially almost a bit like what we were just talking about, Goody's philosophy of not tagging, which was that he isn't a defensive forward.
Yeah, he was very adamant that's
he was
not
very
his
clear
role.
on that,
Yeah.
wasn't he? And I thought that was really interesting, because what he was essentially saying is that I reference my opponent, and of course I want to look to minimise the impacts of the players you mentioned, Andrews and Core, and I don't think he played on Wiedering, but whoever he plays on, he looks to minimise their impact. But as he pointed out in your interview, he also wants to make a scoreboard impact himself.
Yep.
And so not only did he do that, he was doing exactly what George said. He was physically tackling in this game. He was, he run down tackle, which I hadn't seen him do before. I don't think he even quite got there, but he forced some pressure that forced a bad kick. His aggression is arguably what hurt him in the end, because he came flying in to 𝗟𝗲𝘀𝘁𝗃, and the commentators were suggesting that was somehow linked to the knee, although they didn't extrapolate or go into any more detail. So it's just heartbreaking, and it was really. And Luke Dunstan is also, we should note, he's done his knee, and what a warrior he's been for the D's and for 𝗪𝗀𝗃. On the same day, I just saw tonight the footage of them both hobbling into the club. I mean, really, it totally heartbreaking, and could support. The club will get around both players, and both players are in a very similar position, probably career wise.
Absolutely,
there's heartbreaking.
So I guess now I know we're not supposed to talk changes this week, but our forward line still remains decimated. Despite this, we have the 5th highest points for and the 2nd highest percentage. B-Man, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, one of the positives of this year is how, and again, Goody is starting to get some credit for this, is that how he's taken that to used it to an advantage, that fluidity and the players coming in and out, and that's a coach who's got a system in place, and everyone's going, what's happening up forward, and connection this and connection that. I mean, as you just suggested, we've been scoring. Scoring is not our problem. We're scoring more points than the so-called, powerhouse Pies. That's just a fact. 24 games home and away. We've got enough data to know scoring isn't our issue. But one of the advantages of it is we've had multiple players who can come in. And And no disrespect at all to Melksham. He was 100% best 22. He was going to play finals. That's part of the heartbreak as well. But as it turns out, we have a perfect replacement for him right in the team right now. Smith is the perfect player for that role because he can play that referencing off the key interceptor role. He's got the leap to be able to play tall against a Wiedering or a Darcy Moore. He's got the speed to go. He's got the acceleration to go with the Darcy Moore. And he can zone off and be an aggressive attacking player like Jake was saying to you, that it's still important to be scoring goals and not just be a negative defender. So I think, my thought was always that Smith would be the super sub. I think now he's going to take he's going to take that role. Yeah. So he can just slot straight into Melksham's role. And where I was going with no disrespect to Jakey is that he is a brilliant athlete in his prime, Smith, in terms of his ability to cover, say, 200-300 metres at pace. Almost no one in the team. I think he's second in the time trial this year. He's probably the second or third fastest player over, say, 150 metres, Smith. But critically, he's really quick over those first few steps. And Melky isn't any of those things necessarily. He's a huge competitor. So, as tragic it is for Melk, I think we've got a player who's going to be able to play that role, who's in the team already, and it leaves space for another forward, maybe T-Mac, I'm not sure, to come in and slot straight in there.
Well, 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃 asks, gents, can we discuss our forward line struggles? We must have used 7 or 8 different lineups. Started with Brown, Fritsch and Petty. Then JVR came in for Brown. Some Joel Smith cameos. We've used 𝗟𝗂, Grundy, T-Mac along the way. Then Melksham, Fritsch. Now Melksham is out. It is remarkable that despite all of these woes, we've had very efficient and potent attack. Shout out to JVR as a first-year player with a huge ceiling. Melksham's, as we've said, is a massive loss, and fingers crossed Bayley's foot is right in 2 weeks' time. We know he was sent for scans today, which was most likely as a precaution from the hobbling off, and 2, it's his first game back, so he would have probably gone for scans just to sort of check it all after his first hit out. Now, I can't wait for a week or two to hear how our forward line's going to look in 2 weeks' time, so I need to hear some wisdom and some positivity from you guys. So, George, what's our forward line going to... We've discussed it all. You know what? At the start of the year, the pundits all said the question marks on the D's forward line. Throughout the year, we've had injuries in and out, as 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗃 just mentioned, all these different lineups. But on top of it all, as I said, we're still the 5th highest scorer for the year. And we've got the second highest percentage. So we must be doing something right. But what is our forward line going to look like in 10 days' time?
I think Binman's already told us what it's going to be like. We've got Smith there as the Smith, JVR, and Fritsch as the main forwards.
Well, there's 2 guys, one called T-Mac and one called Grundy. I think they're maybe
if you want to go down the T-Mac and Grundy question, well, that's going to be the $60,000 one or whatever it's called these days.
Will one of them come in? Will one of them come in? Do you think we'll bring in at all?
I think we will, but not as a forward solution. The question for the selection committee is going to be: do we need a ruck more than we do we need a forward? And I think for the Collingwood game when it's coming up, I think we're going to need a ruck simply because Collingwood has 2 very capable active rucks at the moment. So that sort of answers the question
Grundy's
for me.
Coming in. Yep.
Yeah. But the question is, can we get the mobility? Would T-Mac then fill that role sufficiently to be able to provide the backup, let's say, against a Cox or a Cameron? I don't know. I would prefer a Grundy, but it's going to be a very difficult question. Well, we can only wait and see. But I think the answer either way is going to be either one of T-Mac or Grundy comes into the side, either as a forward or as a ruck forward combination.
Well, if you ask the media, then Grundy's going to be playing for Port Adelaide next week. So
yeah. Is Kane Corns the media, or
are
they all the same?
Sorry, the interesting thing. This is what I've been talking about all season. Basically, is that we need to move away from looking at each game like some sort of litmus test for the finals. And like the reality is that we will, exactly what George just said, is that in 10 days' time, we'll be picking a team to play Collingwood and win that game. That's so this whole idea of, well, what's our forward line going to look like? You know, this whole narrative discussion that's been going all season really is a moot point, because it will be, what's our best team to beat Collingwood in the qualifying final? And then, you know, hopefully 2 more games after that. So, you know, it'll be horses for courses to, it looks like Cox and Cameron, but yeah, so I agree with George. I think the other really huge advantage of having Smith in the team is his athleticism means that you don't need the kilometres perhaps that a Laurie might run. So you could use Laurie as a sub or a Spargo as a sub and come on late in the game and do that sort of, you know, high volume running that those players are needing to do to cover off when, you know, everyone else is flagging, because Smith can cover ground. He can do some of that up and down the ground running. And if you look at his heat map for this game, he was up and down the ground a lot, Smith. So he does provide, you know, he provides a lot of solutions to problems, Smith, you know, I think. And really it's credit to the club to be able to manage the situation, to have, it was really unusual to have one area of the ground be so decimated. And normally that's a death knell for any season, is to have one area of the ground. I mean, thank God it's not our defense, because that you know, that would have an outsized impact because it's so critical to the way we play. But leaving that aside, it's been, you know, really impressive performance. But partly a big part of that is a system. We've got a system in place that, you know, we can bring players in and out of it. And just one final comment on that forward line, Andy, I think it's really important that, you know, on that points for, you say we're 5th for points for, and then our defense, we've got the best percentage. Goody talks about this all the time, is that all parts of the ground's positions are connected. So our forward line is also part of our defense, and not just because of the defensive running, but the more we can trap it in our forward line, for instance, the better it provide, or even slow the movement out of our forward line, the better our defensive system can get set behind the ball and, you know, create that wall that we're so good at developing. So, you know, our forward line plays a big role in our defense, and our defense plays a big role in our forward line. So, yeah, those things are connected.
Let's get into the next one. Smurf says, in what was a dead rubber for the D's, I was really impressed with the way we finished out the match after the Swans took control of the game after halftime, booting 3 or 4 unanswered goals. The D's really put the foot down and applied the pressure to arrest momentum and regain control of the match. Hopefully this is just a little taste of what is to come. Someone posted this in the match thread, and it really highlights my point. So Smurf did post a graphic, and the graphic was supplied, I think, from a screenshot of Fox Footy's coverage, and it shows some stats from the 20 minutes into the third quarter until full time. In that time, the D's scored plus 37 points over the Swans, scored 48% of the time going inside 50. They won the contested possession by 20 and had a pressure rating of 210. So Go Lordy adds, hello gents, thanks for the brilliant podcast. Your enthusiasm and sometimes your MFC SS is contagious, and my football weekend is never complete until I hear the panel's dulcet tones analysing the latest game by the Mighty D's. On the Sydney game, I was very impressed by our last quarter, but not surprised. We've been finishing well for some time. In the final quarters of the last 5 games, we have scored 16 goals, 18 behinds, to 7 goals, 5 behinds. Put another way, we have recorded 34 scoring shots to 12 in the last quarters. Only the Crows have pantsed us in the last 2 months when they scored 7 goals 2 to 3 goals 6, but at least we matched them for scoring shots. What I am getting at is that we probably are the fittest team in the finals. We should be confident. Go D. So, Binman, you've been banging on about our fitness to run out games being a weapon for us come September, and our enter the Swans game and the last quarter score stats that Go Lordy provided over the last month or so, or last 5 games, prove that. We saw this in the back end of 2021. Is this a taste of what's to come?
Yeah, and I'll add just this delightful D in terms of that last quarter and a half. So some key stats that showed how we upped our game after the Swans got out to a 17-point lead. 2/3 of the way through the third quarter. From the 20-minute mark of the third quarter, we had 19 more contested possessions, recorded 38 tackles, 15 coming after the 20-minute mark of the third quarter to the end of the third quarter alone. So in the last 10 minutes of that quarter, we had 15 tackles, which is nuts. 7 more inside 50s. From the 20-minute mark to the end of the game, 21-14. We outscored the Swans by 37. That's where we won the game, obviously, 40-3 in that period. We scored 48% of the time we went inside 50 in that last quarter and a half, at 1.9 points per innings, which is amazing, and held the Swans to scoring only 21% of the time they went inside their own 50. Which is just elite defense and elite offense. So much for our quote unquote efficiency issues. And as Delightful D notes, if we play at that level, we'll be hard to stop. It's a matter of how long we can play at that level now, that the finals are here. And I've been, as Andy rightfully says, banging on about this all year. This is all about the fitness that Selwyn Griffith and his team and the high performance management team have been working on since day one of the pre-season, all through the year, then the loading phase in the middle that corresponds with our drop-off in form. We are now seeing the benefit of it. Those numbers are all what we saw in 21. It's incredible that the data across a whole range of metrics that measure, that some of them are suggested, mirror our 21 end of season almost exactly. It's incredible. My view is that we are the fittest side. Did you get a chance to do that clip, Andy?
I did.
I'll set this up. So we are the fittest side in the AFL. We have we have been running our games. I've been talking about this. I've been highlighting our pressure has been going up in the last quarter where other teams have been going down, though in this game that wasn't the case. Swans kept on going, which was all credit to them. It's our strategy is that we hold them and then we roll over the top of them. But if you contrast it to last year, it's what we talked about on the podcast, is something wasn't right into, it wasn't that we went out hard last year to get a break, to get a winning score and then try to hold it. That's the way we played. But if you look at the way Collingwood played in the first part of the year, their dominant quarters were ridiculous. It was first quarter and last quarter. And that was all on the back of their fitness. Their second and third quarters were relatively hopeless. But they've not been running out the fourth quarter. So their strongest quarter in the last few weeks has been their third quarter. They're running out of puff. The Lions are running out of puff. So are Port. All of those teams who are the direct contenders, even Carlton, aren't. Their last quarter isn't their strongest, which is a great sign from me. I've been talking about fitness also being, I think, apart from injury and system and those things, are really critical and perhaps arguably the most important factor behind injury in terms of a chance of winning a flag. I think it's been proven. I think it will be proven to be the case. And this is from Daniel Hoyne from SEN, who does Tuesday nights on SEN. He's really good, actually. I like a lot of the stuff. It's helpful because he's been on Melbourne's bandwagon right from the beginning of the season and not been a Pies supporter. So he's been one of the few people in the media who's really pushed back against the narrative and of the Pies' strengths and really highlighted their vulnerabilities, but at the same time highlighting our strengths. And so this clip is about our fitness and, how he sees it as our strength.
You've touched on the Ds. You want to go further?
Yeah, so I just want to touch on one aspect for Melbourne that I think was really evident in their 2021 successful campaign, and that was their ability to be able to run over the opposition and really sort of just outlast them in a fitness battle, if you like. So in 2021, they outscored their opposition by over 130 points in final quarters, which was the third best of any team in the competition that season. And that was sort of, really evident in their finals campaign in particular, sort of, running over Geelong, running over the Dogs and running over Brisbane in week one of the finals as well. That aspect of their campaign in 2022 dropped significantly in the second half of last year, where they were actually outscored by 110 points in final quarters. So you can remember a lot of last year, they actually went into three-quarter time leading a lot of their games, but they just ran out of juice. If you think back to that final against Sydney, they led at halftime. If you think back to the final against Brisbane, they led at halftime, but they just ran out of gas. This year, they are by far and away the best fourth quarter team in the competition.
They're off the French food this year.
So they have that running capability back. And we've seen over the last 3 years, Geelong last year were clearly the best fourth quarter team in the competition. Melbourne, as I said, in 2021 was so strong. And again, now Melbourne in 2023 are the best fourth quarter team in the competition. So they've been able to actually do that over the last 8 weeks reasonably well. And it's just an aspect where they've been able to sort of, get their game back to where it was in 2021 as opposed to where it was in 2022.
Good signs for the Demons. What about the Saints?
You see, Jared Healy, he really didn't like the D's getting any credit there, so has to make a joke.
He's been on board the D's training all season too. So
I jump at shadows. I see enemies everywhere.
But what he was talking about just then is what we just saw on the weekend gone, is that they pushed hard. They threw everything at us. And how often in 21 did we talk on the podcast about oppositions throwing their best shot at us and like a boxer tying themselves out, and then we rolled over the top of them? That just didn't happen at this time last year, and you could see it, But this time it is happening. It's happened in every single game. Our big games in the last 6 weeks, we've just rolled over the opposition.
And unlike 2022, we're not carrying the injuries that we were in that year. You can look at not running it out. It's because people couldn't run it out, not because they weren't fit. We were certainly fit in the first half of the years, but like I said, running into that Brisbane final, we had 6 people with knee injuries of some sort. You can't run all that hard.
Well, and it turns out, I cannot recall Petrarca jumping for the ball the way he's doing at the moment since his first year, when he was really jumping more, and he was probably heavier but not as muscly. But that mark he took that Nibbler kicked over the back, it was a beautiful mark. He wasn't doing that this time last year.
No.
And as it turned out, we discovered after the season he came in with a broken leg, a hairline fracture in his, so I remember we talked about it, that maybe it was a pre-Swans training session. It looked like, they were filming Gallipoli with all of the bandages, and there's none of that this year.
What I'd be interested in, Bedman and Andy, is where are Adelaide at, given that they've got the Burgess factor over there now. Well, we've got the apprentice to Burgess, but were they finishing the games equally as well?
Yeah, very much so, and it's they've got the second highest percentage. I'm pretty sure they've got the highest percentage of a team outside not finishing in the 8 for something like 30 years, and it's all on the back of their ability to keep coming. And I mean, the game last week, that horror show for them with the post, that was the best example. They came from 40 points down, and the Swans were flagging, who have been really struggling in last quarters. So yes, very much so, and that's why they'll be spewing that.
It turns out they would have been playing finals.
I'm really glad they didn't make finals.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
they would have done some damage.
Yeah, and Bin Man's betting for next year is already starting to be set.
Yes, they're with the Bullet and the Giants as well. So,
and not just the fast finishing; they are also the highest scoring team in the competition.
Yeah. It was good that they didn't make it. I think I was very pleased that they didn't make it, albeit the AFL deserved their rather flat last round after being built up, all because they couldn't afford to pay for some decent cameras.
All right.
Which, by the way, as it's turned out, has not been such a bad thing. I 100% would prefer to be playing Collingwood first week of the finals at the G than Brisbane first week of the finals at the G, which is what would have happened if that Petrarca goal had stood. We would have won that game. We would have finished second. Brisbane would have finished third, and we would be playing the qualifying final against Brisbane, and would have given them a better chance of beating us than I give the Pies of beating us. So I think it's the footy gods have smiled on us, and it's worked out beautifully.
Well, then you better hope we beat Collingwood, because otherwise we'll be and we still could play Brisbane in the grand final, even if we beat Collingwood.
After they've played 2 game finals,
okay,
and they're starting to struggle.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so from fast finishing to slow starts. Maybe we should have started with this one. Red and Blue Beard says, "Thanks for the podcast, guys. Always great stuff. Our slow starts seem to be an issue. Is this tactical or just working our way into the game? If Sydney had been on target earlier, the game may have got away from us." George, it was another slow start from the Demons. It wasn't just the first quarter. After halftime, the Swans got the early jump on us. Are we ever going to come out of the blocks or out of the rooms at halftime, switched on and firing? Or Is it tactical?
I think Bin Man talked a little bit about this just before, that like a boxing match, the fighters size each other up a little bit to find out what's going on. There is a lot more strategic factors in football these days about how defences and forward lines and positioning on the ground has to be managed from the box from the very early on. You've got to be looking at what the opposition's doing. I know the fans just love the idea of coming out and kicking 20 goals in the first quarter, or doing what Collingwood did to Essendon on the weekend. It looks fantastic, but this game's a long grind. They might be slow starts, but it's what you're doing at the end is the critical factor, whether you're still going at the end. So, yeah, I can't provide any answer for that, but I'd much prefer to be winning games at the end rather than trying to win the first quarter.
And Big Man, you mentioned that, I think, last week against Hawthorn when we talked slow starts about the sizing up of and to see what the opposition's going to do and then make those adjustments of what we need to do to beat them.
Yeah, I mean, you probably wouldn't over-egg that pudding too much, but I that's how, like, it feels that way. And obviously we would prefer to be 3-4 goals up at the end of the first quarter. That goes without saying, but we could generate the likelihood of that happening more if we were more aggressive with our ball movement, which we were this time last year. You know, we were, remember against the Pies, for instance, in round 22, we were 6 goals up, or we should have been 7 or 8 goals up at halftime. We attacked hard. As I said, I think it's because we knew we were going to run out of gas late. So you can engineer it, but as we've talked about heaps, is that sure you do that, but against a team that kicks as well as the Swans do, you also open yourself up. If you're going to be more aggressive, you open yourself up for goals on the counter or for turnovers really hurting because you've turned them over in dangerous spots. So it's, you know, we've talked about this a lot, Goody's philosophy around playing the percentages. The percentages is to allow the opposition to give their best shot, get a sense of how they're approaching the game and tactically respond. The other thing, it goes back to the discussion we were just having about fitness, is that if you accept the fact that we've got a relative fitness advantage over the opposition, and this game was the perfect example of it, like all of those numbers that we were just talking about from halfway through the third quarter to the last, that's based on one team is much fitter than the other. Well, logic suggests that the time at which that gap is at its smallest is in the first quarter. So our relative advantage and our game plan is built on having a fitness advantage, on being able to grind oppositions into the ground. Well, we don't have that in the first quarter. You know, it's all even Stevens on the fitness front until red time. And that's where I'd love to know this data, and maybe I'll see if I can find it. But our goal in red time in the last 5 minutes, once time on, I'll bet you my bottom dollar that we're number one in the AFL for goals in the last 5 minutes of quarters, because that's where you will, within the first quarter, you'll get an advantage. It might have even been in this game we kicked goals late. We certainly did in the third quarter. So, you know, and the other thing is, they're good teams that we're playing against. This team, Swans, is a good team playing on the home deck with everything to play for. 6-6-6, you haven't got your defensive set up. If you lose a centre clearance and they get it out the front, well, they're going to score. So you're going to give up goals at some stage. I actually, as I said, I thought this was our best start for a few weeks in terms of first quarters, but I was surprised when I saw that our pressure was actually a little low. So, yeah, I don't think it's a major worry. And, we've still been winning, haven't we? So it can't be too much of a worry.
Oops, get myself off mute. Third quarter blues. So Lazy asks, do you take more out of the fact that we came out in the third quarter half asleep, or the fourth where we really dug in and got the job done? I think it's the latter, as it is extremely hard to find that extra motivation when nothing is on the line and the Swans did have something to play for. So, B-Man, which do you take more out of that early third-term slumber, or the late third quarter comeback and control of the game in the last?
Well, as I said, I rewatched the replay today, and as the numbers suggest, that's what I thought too. We looked a bit lackluster watching it live, but that's not what the replay showed me. They just played super well, and I think their pressure in the first 10 minutes of that quarter was up around the 215, 220 margin. The Swans, that is, and we weren't that far behind. We were 190 or whatever. So I felt the same thing as Lazy watching it live, that we took a little while to get going. But I think credit must be given to the Swans for how they came out. So to answer the question is that, I don't think we did come out really maybe on the back foot, maybe a better way of looking at it, but massive effort, as I talked about before, to grind back into that game. I just, as I said at the top of the show, I'm just so proud of that result. I was so pumped to be a D's fan afterwards. You wouldn't believe it. I just love that victory, and purely because from that moment on, you just got the sense where Track and 𝗦cie in particular, and Oliver, and less so this week 𝗦cie, who didn't really have a huge influence, I'd have to say. But it was those three leaders and Nibbler who just said, we're not going to lose this game of footy. And it was inspiring to watch it. And as I said, they saw their comrades going down. Fritter maybe out, Melksham out, with a serious knee injury, and still put their head over the ball and still attacked. And I'm going to watch. I've still got the last quarter to watch, so I'm really looking forward to that.
Well, enjoy that. You seem to really enjoy this game more than the grand final. So
more than the grand final.
Spoiler alert: we won the last quarter.
Next up, we got quite a bit of love for two fairly new players to the team. Lefty says, you boys are consistently knocking each podcast out of the park, so thank you for being a big part of my Demon supporting week each week. Would love to get your thoughts on 𝗟¿Disco's game this week, as well as your thoughts on Laurie's cameo. Both showed some very good signs. 𝗟¿Disco, for mine, is ahead of Tomlinson at the moment, so would love to get your take. Laurie, for his part, did some nice things when he came on too, adding to his good showing last week. We've added some nice depth late in the season. Do you think either of them will feature in September? Wells11 said, curious about your take on the inclusions of Turner and Laurie so late in the year. How do you think they make us better than, say, Tomo and Spargo? Travie14 adds, fantastic win. In my opinion, our last two our two best wins this year have been against the Swans. What does the panel think about young Turner? I have watched a bit of him in the VFL and think he's going to become a very good player. Supreme Demon asks about 𝗟𝗀. How did you rate Daniel 𝗟𝗀 Turner's game against the Swans? I thought he did some nice things and he's pretty composed with the ball. And then Supreme Demon asks about Laurie. What are the views about Bayley Laurie against the Swans? He came on as a super sub and did a couple of handy things, including an excellent kick into the forward line. Does Bayley Laurie earn a chance to play in the finals? The Old Fart says, really looking forward to tonight's pod as usual, guys. My question relates to 𝗟𝗟/Tomo. Clearly, they bring very different attributes, including the important criterion of experience. Is it horses for courses, depending on the opposition, or is one or the other pretty much locked in for our remaining games? Beauty adds, thought 𝗟𝗀 did enough to keep his spot as the third tall. And finally, Bay Riffin says, I thought Turner and Laurie as the sub both had good game. Turner, whilst beaten on the lead early, seemed to get better as the game went on. His aggressive kicking was executed well, and he's tough as nails and with a lot of great contested work in what was a brutally hard game. I think we have a beauty. He just needs more time at AFL level. Laurie is finding the confidence 𝗟𝗀 had first year and showing his tricks. His passing and movement through traffic was terrific. So, big man, perhaps you take 𝗟𝗟, George, you take Laurie. You can both add your 2 cents to each of them too. So, big man, take it away on 𝗟𝗟.
𝗟𝗟, I thought he had a great game, actually. And, again, it's interesting reading Demonland, seeing the different take.
Well, that's what you're going to get on Demonland. You're going to get every
true.
different take.
No knock. I mean, that's, as I said, people see it differently, don't they? So, we talked about this last week. And again, it's something I've been talking about all season, is that, as George said, the Tigers set the template of the way footy's played at the moment back in 2017. But I think it's really interesting that the Pies haven't won a flag yet. It's normally the flag winners that set the template. And, as I've talked about, the seven of the last 8 flags have all been won basically using that Tigers model. The outlier it was the Eagles in 2018. But McRae introduced that sort of tactical tweak, I think, to defeat us, which is that ultra-fast ball movement from the half-back flank. And Adelaide, it's interesting, George mentioned Adelaide, they've adopted a really similar model, though I don't think they take as many risks defensively as their percentage shows. And the Hawks have taken that model again and given it a further tweak. So it's interesting that the Pies, without having won a flag, have actually brought in an element to the game, which is speed. And so I'm increasingly, think that leg speed's really important, and 2 types of leg speed in particular: acceleration from a standing start, and an ability to cover, say, 150 metres at a reasonable clip. And in a nutshell, I reckon that's why Tomo's out and Turner's in, because he is He's relatively quick. He's quick off the mark, which is critical, quick enough to get across in zone. One-on-one, he's going to get exposed a little bit because he isn't, he's young and he's not as strong as Tomo, so that's an area of weakness. But the problem for Tomo is his lack of leg speed means that he can only really be a one-on-one defender because he can't be that sort of, zone off or something that we saw Turner do a lot already in this game was to push up the ground and track it up high, which, Tomo does a little bit, but he's just a bit slow, I think. And so I think really number one thing that as a backman, Turner goes into overdrive. He's good in terms of his ability to read the ball. He reminds me a little bit of Petty in the sense he's a natural zoner. He gets across. Maybe he's probably grown up as a defender, as a junior, with zone systems in place. So he really is quite aggressive with his decisions to get from his man across to help out and be a third man up. I thought he played really, really well. As I said, he's quick. He can get off. He can cover ground pretty well. And I think that faster transition game has also sort of played into his favour because there's smaller forward lines. So there's less, there's more medium forwards as there is in our forward line, for instance, who are quick and less lumbering than, say, Benny Brown, for instance. So which plays well for Turner because he's, there's maybe only two big keys forwards that have to be locked down. So similarly, that's why I think Goody likes Smith in the team because of the acceleration. So, yeah, I think Turner's every chance to staying in because I think we all three of us agree that Turner or the third tall allows Lever and May to play to their strengths. And one of the things that May's been doing in the last few games that I love, and in this game he was brilliant, is really getting a high up the ground and getting possessions at the wing or even the half forward line. And when we've got Stephen May kicking inside our 50, our defensive system is super dangerous. And it makes Stephen May a really attacking defender then. And you need a player like Turner to do that. So, my feeling is Turner will stay in the side. I'm not sure about you, George.
I'm absolutely convinced Turner will stay in the side because he fits the structure, which Tomo doesn't. We'll talk more about structure later on, but I said last week, 3 of Hawthorn's first 4 goals, maybe the 4th last week, were because Tomo didn't play zone. When Lever and May move up the ground, like we saw in this particular game, the third person has to move back to cover the back. And in the Swans game, Turner was doing exactly that, which really impressed me right from the start. And as a result, you see the effects on Lever and May. They suddenly come to the fore because they can move up the ground because they know they've got someone they can rely on to cover the hole that's left at the back. Turner just did that beautifully. Yes, he's going to get caught out because it was his third game, or I think it was only his third game in the club colours. But he fits the structures, which is absolutely critical for the way that we work as a defensive unit. If you've got someone who's playing some other way, going man to man when he shouldn't be going man to man, then the whole structure starts to fall apart. I'm a big vote for Turner to come in and stay there at the moment.
All right. Now, George, you want to talk about Laurie's cameo performance on the weekend? We didn't get to see much of him, but we did get to see him last week, and we saw a few nice things. Yeah,
it was an interesting selection in the first place because he's at 𝗪cie. He's basically spent his whole time in the midfield. So being used in other roles as a sub, he had a few good cameo appearances in this one. It's going to be interesting to see how they utilise him if he's going to play in the next game or in further finals. I think the big problem he has, and he's had this problem all along, is that if he's playing the majority of his of the roles in the midfield at 𝗪cie, who does he replace in the midfield when he comes into the seniors? If he's not playing in the midfield, who else does he replace?
Playing high half forward is the role.
So does he replace Nibbler? Does he replace? No, you see.
Well, no.
The problem
instead of 𝗟𝗏𝘀𝘁𝗃. So he's not replacing anyone at the moment because that's the thing. He's playing as a forward, not as a midfielder.
And that's his problem. That's his exact problem. I suspect he might get a sub role, but it won't be anything more than that. There's just no position available for him in the side at the moment that's going to ensure him a continuous role. So.
Well, it depends. I think he would have because of that need for a high half forward. He came in instead of 𝗟𝗏𝘀 to play that role, and he was sub this week. And that's the role he played when he came in as a sub. He was the high half forward, so 50-metre arc to 50-metre arc, running up and down that wing, inside 50 kicks. So that's the role he can play. And I think with Smith playing permanently in the team, you don't need as many runners because Smith can cover the ground a little bit. But otherwise, there's every chance that he could come into that team and you just play a small forward. It's we did it early in the season, round one. We had Chandler, 𝗏𝗏𝘀𝗁, 𝗟𝗏𝘀 and Nibbler all playing together in our best lineup in round one, and we had that same lineup except Laurie playing for 𝗟𝗏𝘀 against the Hawks. So there's no reason we can't do it. But then Smith would be sub. But I think that now that Melk's injured, Smith
will stay in because at the moment we do have no other real options.
And I mean, the only query I have I thought Laurie was quite good, and I think the advantage he's got over 𝗟𝗏𝘀, to be honest, is the fact that even though he's playing as a forward now in the seniors, is as a midfielder, he's got good instincts to get the footy, and that's the knock on 𝗟𝗏𝘀 that is I think a reasonable criticism. He doesn't get enough of the pill, and Laurie, he was only on for what, a quarter, was he?
Quarter, yeah.
He ended up with pretty good possessions. Was it 8 or 9?
Oh, I don't have it in front of me. I had it opened a moment ago, but
I thought he played. And he's a good kick. So it'll be interesting to see. But he doesn't provide the flexibility as a sub that a Smith does he? He's not going to be able to go down back and play at all, obviously. So I think that creates a tactical dilemma because the sub, we haven't had to use the sub all year pretty much, or not that often for injury related reasons. But if we cop an injury early on in a big game and we've got a runner, I mean, I guess you can shuffle things around. So and he can go into the midfield rotation. So he can probably play halfback at a pinch. I thought he's been pretty good.
He had 9 possessions, but he also had 8 or 9 pressure acts. Which was the same as Lachie Hunter, Melksham, Gawn. We don't expect Gawn to have that many. And Jacob Van Rooyen 10. So in just the quarter, he's done all right in terms of pressure. We got some follow-ups.
His player rating for the game was 7.4. Ed Langdon's was 7.7. So it's not bad in a quarter of footy.
Absolutely.
And better than 𝗟𝗏𝘀𝘁's at 6.9.
Well, we've got questions about 𝗟𝗏𝘀𝘁's game as well a bit later on. We've got some follow-ups on the Laurie in terms of the debate of Laurie versus 𝗟𝗏𝘀. So Mr. Freeze says, Laurie versus 𝗟𝗏𝘀. I'm a huge fan of 𝗟𝗏𝘀's and have been a big defender of his, but I think Laurie may have his number. He's bigger, a more natural ball winner, has good ball use by foot going inside 50 and he can extract out of packs. And Gorge Dunyan asks, is Laurie greater than 𝗟𝗏𝘀 on exposed form? The panel's answer is, George?
Depends which week we were looking at them. When 𝗟𝗏𝘀 played at 𝗚𝗚𝗁 2 weeks ago, he had 32 possessions, was easily the best person on the ground and didn't get selected.
Yeah, it was 15 or something.
That's why I said at the start, I was surprised he was selected based on what was happening at 𝗚𝗚𝗁. This week we've seen exactly the reverse. 𝗟𝗏𝘀, I think, only got 17 touches, didn't really shine in any way, shape or form against a very ordinary opposition, as it turned out. Laurie comes on and gets 9 possessions in 1 quarter. So it's is one better than the other? I really don't know at the moment.
Well, one thing that we do know is that he's the incumbent, and I know Goody talks about it's a new season.
Yep.
So he's in the team, and Goody historically hasn't moved players out of the team, but he a bit more this year.
Except for Tomo.
Except for Tomo. Yeah, exactly. Except for Tomo. A curious thing, we've had a couple of good bits of luck. I'm going to claim that the Carlton disaster with Track's goal is actually turned out to be a good bit of luck because we're playing Collingwood, and I like that. But the other good bit of luck is VFL having to play that wildcard game last week. It would have been another bloody bye in 𝗙cie, so no 5 goals for T-Mac, no 3 goals and 33 possessions for Grundy. Because we would have had the week off if not for that. So we get that extra game. They get the game this week, the elimination final, I think it is.
Yeah, against the Bulldogs.
Yeah, so another opportunity for the Spargos and for T-Mac and for Grundy to get another game in. So that's
except
actually,
that it's only 4 days beforehand.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. Wouldn't obviously concussion and can you play? That's
It's not as good as maybe or what.
Well, take him off at half time.
Yeah.
Wow.
In the elimination final. Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah, that's interesting, actually. Yeah, that is curious.
Just another thing to talk about the scheduling, which even if it was a Friday, it's still 5 days. It's not a lot, and we'll talk about that a bit later on. On to B-Man's favourite player, Prestige D, asked thoughts on A&B's game, had 12 tackles today and has had a really underrated year in my opinion, both offensively and defensively, so important to what we do, and he's one of the spiritual leaders. There is a question because he's asked for thoughts on Nibbler's game, so this question's right up your alley, Bin Man.
Well, you've said he was fantastic. Yeah. Am I on mute?
No.
He was fantastic, wasn't he? And much to everyone's pleasure, surely. Everyone must be loving his kicking. His disposal efficiency was 62.5%. So I'm going to compare him to Jack Viney. Everyone's pumping up Jack Viney's game, including me. He had a player rating in this game of 9.6, and I've talked about this before. The player rating is a fair bit of stocks put in this by the clubs. It's a bucket of different information that they bring in to arrive at this rating for an individual game. So 9.6 for Jack Viney. Nibbler, 14.3, his player rating for this game, which I don't know, but I'm guessing that's probably his season high. That is fantastic. His average is 9.5 for the season. So that's big time football at this stage of the year. 62.5 disposal efficiency, as I said. Only 223 metres gained. Inside 50s, 4. Contested possessions, he had 10 contested possessions. Again, compared to Viney, he had 14, so only 4 less than Jack in that regard. Time on ground, he was 78% of the time. 9 kicks, 7 handballs. He took a mark. He had 1 shot at goal, missed it. A goal assist, 1 to Jack's 2. Score involvements, he had 5 score involvements. So, by the way, while looking at this, Callum Mills had 10 score involvements, which is pretty impressive. And as noted in the question, 12 tackles, which was a team high for Melbourne. Jack Viney also had 12, and Callum Mills had 12. So the next was Sam Wicks with 9 tackles. So massive, another massive game from Nibbler, who, by the way, got a coach's vote a couple of weeks back, or maybe was it last week? And I think it's the first coach's vote he's got this year. And
it wasn't last week because they've held off the last 2 rounds so that they can award it without people knowing who's going to win.
Right.
So and Track's right up there, actually.
About his kicking, like his pass to Fritter straight up the guts, that was a thing of beauty. And, if anything, I'd like to see him take his shots for goal a little bit more often because he's so unselfish. And he gave one early to Track that Track just choked. He put Track into space, and all Track had to do was turn it across his body. You're shelling peas for Track, and he somehow missed it. So another fantastic game. He's a real clever guy. He's great to listen to, and he's definitely a spiritual leader at the club.
There was a couple of things that Woody talked about, and that one of those is momentum changes within the game. And I believe that momentum changes usually come out of a single act by an individual, and then the rest of the team builds on it. In the third quarter, we saw Petrarca absolutely rip the ball out of a pack to get that goal to get us back on track. But in the last quarter, it was Nibbler's tackle. I can't remember who it was on. It was on the wing where he got the grabbed the guy by one hand. It was a tackle that really wasn't justified to make almost, but he got the ball, got the free kick and delivered it in the forward line, and that started the momentum again for the side in that fourth quarter. So in this game, it was those couple of very critical momentum swings, I think, actually got us not only back in the game, but on the winning track for the game.
Yeah, and again, I say it every week about Nibbler, but the amount of running that Langdon, Hunter and Nibbler do, and Chandler's been doing a lot as well, but it's just phenomenal. 16, 17 kilometres a game, Nibbler averages, half of which is at striding speed. That's serious, work every week. So huge game from him. He also looks in great nick. And just what I think about, one of the things about Nibbler that, is so laudable is his discipline. And I just I was going to say this last week, but forgot about it. But the discipline of Melbourne is something that goes unnoticed a little bit. And one of the best examples of the discipline is how we stand the mark. I love it. So we always look to make sure that we get as far across to the corridor as possible before the umpire calls stand. We make sure that we get right up on the mark. And if there's any risk that we can't, we only that's the only time we give them that 5 metres. But one of the things that we do that other clubs don't, and I think for me it speaks to the discipline of this team and Goodwin's focus on the small things, is that they constantly, and the player on the mark constantly looks towards the umpire and points to the umpire and points to the player, encouraging the umpire to call play on so that they know exactly when the umpire calls play on and then they move forward. I been noticing that for the last 3-4 weeks and watching other teams. Other teams don't do it. Which means that crucial little half second, we're putting a little bit more pressure on the opposition. We're closing down space a little bit more. It's just, for me, just another example of how disciplined this team is. And going back to Nibbler, he's probably the most disciplined player in the team.
Let's get on to Salem. 𝗏𝗏 says, worried about Salem, had just one disposal to his name deep into the third quarter and ended on 8 at the conclusion of the game. He did have a much better final term, and maybe I'm being too hard on him given his 88% disposal efficiency and 21 pressure acts. It just seems like he's really struggled at times after his injury earlier this season. He appears to lack good acceleration from contests and generally seems slow. I've also noted his kicks have more often than not lacked considerable penetration. It's been all the more noticeable when you have backs like McVeigh and Rivers in the form they're in. Salo's experience and leadership will be crucial in the finals campaign, but I wish he was in better form. What kind of role do you expect him to have against the Pies? Chook answers saying, I have no idea. From the outside, it looks like he is in drop-worthy form, but in Fritsch's post-match interview with Channel 7, one of the first players he went to in the naming the senior players who got us out of trouble in the second half was Salem. I lean towards Fritsch being out of the loop and Salem being a memory of his 2021 self, but there's still that seniority and experience we've so long wanted and now actually have with players like him. Let's not give up like we did with James McDonald and players of their ilk. 𝗍𝗍𝗍 says, would be interested to get the panel's take on Salem's game this week, and I guess an overall take on his form since his return from injury since the Port Adelaide game. I thought his first 3 quarters were terrible. He couldn't get his hands on the pill. To his credit, he lifted his game in the last. Taking away the emotion and my love for the guy and all of his past contributions and the memory of his exceptional first half in the granny, I would even say he could be on the verge of needing a spell to find form. However, we're at the pointy end of the season, and with Bowie possibly injured and Hibbo possibly returning from concussion and very little game time in the past month or so, I don't think we can afford to do that. Plus, we do know what he is capable of, and I hope he can return. He can turn it around on the fly. Love the podcast. Thank you, and keep up the great job, guys. Some exciting times ahead. Rue Beauty adds, Salem was very quiet again. Most players are a bit sore at this time of year, so hopefully the week off helps. But is it more than general soreness? So, Georgia, are there any concerns with Salem's game?
I'm not really concerned with Salem's game. We do have to remember that he was missing for a good part of the season for a start off. That's when players get their running in and all that sort of thing, and we're now at the end of a very long season. So it's not surprising that he might be feeling the pinch, so to speak. But I feel people don't really notice what Salem does in the game, apart from fitting into the structures beautifully in the defensive side of things. the thing that I really love about him is when he tackles, he doesn't tackle just to stop the player. He tackles to get the ball out of their hands. So that creates turnovers for other people. Does he get a statistic for that? Absolutely not. But the ball suddenly finishes up in somebody else's hands. We can move into the attack as a result. I have noticed, as one of the other Demonlanders did, that last week he just didn't have the penetration on his kick that he normally did. We remember the opportunity in the Carlton game to kick from 50. Normally that would have been an absolute certainty for 𝗟𝗍, and he certainly didn't make the distance really. So whether there's some underlying problem, I don't know. But he's a long way from not fitting into the side, and quite frankly, we don't have anyone else of his quality to be able to go into the side.
Yeah, I find it a little bit hard because he's been down on form, but it's really hard to know. His role's not as clear as it used to be because that half back line, Bowie plays that a sort of similar role in a little bit, and 𝗏𝗏 has also played that sort of half-back kicking role quite a bit. So his role is not as sort of clearly defined as it probably was a season ago. And so I find it a little hard to get a handle on how he's playing. But like you say, George, he's hard as a cat's head, isn't he? And he's got a really clever way that he uses his body. That's an interesting point you make about getting the ball out of tackles, because opposition's it's a real skill that, when you're wanting to attack, you've got to get the ball free of those contests. I think I heard someone, maybe it was on the radio or I can't recall, that they put a bit of time into Salem in this game, Longmire, that they looked to try and shut down his influence. So I might be making that up completely. But, like a lot of players, he's going to enjoy the week off. He doesn't, even if he has got an underlying thing, he was crocked last year. He was another one who was clearly struggling. So he's looking like he's running much more freely than he was last year. So, his experience will also, is so important. I think that's something that a lot of the media commentators are really underestimating, how important our experience of big time football is compared to our opponents. Might be wrong here, but I don't think any other of the top four, three contenders have played in a grand final. I've got that wrong, but
the top 8, we're the only ones who's played in a premiership.
Yeah,
9 players in the top. The top, there must be some who have been drafted in who have played. But I think I read that out of the top 14, not a single player other than at Melbourne has played in a grand final, winning or losing.
Lachie Hunt. Oh, well, he plays for us now. Sorry.
Yeah, Lachie Hunt. Yeah, he plays for us. That's right.
Yeah. I did read. They had the finals experience guide of all the players of all the teams, and I think we're 4th on the list in finals experience.
Port Adelaide and Geelong Port Adelaide and Lions have certainly played a lot of finals, but no grand finals.
Well, finals experience for the competing clubs: Brisbane Lions 228, Sydney 207, Collingwood 192, Melbourne 191. So we're on par with Collingwood. GWS 133, Port 118, St Kilda 70, and Carlton finals experience 29.
So 𝗟𝗍's, he's one of our senior players. So I think it's an interesting question. The upside of it, reframing it in a positive way, is that if he hasn't been playing at his best, that means we've got a player who can go up a couple of levels and play at a very elite level who may well come finals.
Those numbers include players that's the whole list. So Ben Brown, Tom McDonald, who aren't in the seniors, including Zach Grundy, has played finals. So Fritsch, Supreme Demon says, how about some love for Bayley Fritsch? How amazing is he to come back after injury and kick 5 goals against the Swans? Was fantastic. Frida really is a star. Let's hope the injury scare to his foot is nothing as well. Rue Beauty adds, great to have Frida back. I've missed looking at his amazing hair. Seriously, what a player. And well done to the fitness staff for getting him ready to play at that level straight off the bat. How was your MFCSS, Andy, when he went down to the rooms with his foot injury? What do you think, Rue Beauty? And more on my MFCSS a bit later on, as someone has asked that question. What a star Bayley Fritsch to miss 7 weeks with a serious foot injury, come back and kick 5 goals without missing a beat is just absolutely fantastic. We saw his trademark straight shooting, some of his dead-eye snaps. It was all just what the doctor ordered. Both fingers crossed that the foot injury that he hobbled off with is not too serious and he can play through it. He looked terrible walking off. I thought, that's it. We're not seeing him ever again.
I
But
felt sick of
I know
that stage
the
of
way he
game.
went off. It's like that. Talk about MFCSS, which we will later. That was up to a 10 or 11. But then
Because it looked so much like 𝗏𝗏's, the way 𝗏𝗏 did his foot as
you
well.
could see his
Like,
face. There was pain. That was pain in his
yeah.
face. So there's something there. Whether he can play through it, and he came back. He didn't look hampered at all. And we know
he
he's gone
slotted
off for
2
scans
goals,
today.
beautiful, and
And he's probably gone off to scans today because, one, he would have probably had scans anyway, just coming back, just checking how his first game went. Maybe it was already booked in. It definitely has scans because he's had some pain or whatever. So that's fingers crossed. But would you, if he can still run and play, would they risk him and just play him?
well, who knows?
Well,
It's just a
he
separate
played the
question to our
played
game.
the-
I
played
know,
out this
but
game,
we're
so-
at the pointy end of the season. We're struggling as long as he's not, as long as he can walk and kick and whatever, and it's just a bit of, would you
The
still
other option,
play?
the other option we've got, Andy, is to bring in one of those soccer physios who come onto the ground
And
with a
spray the
can of
magic
some sort of spray and fix, people who've had a leg amputated from the pain and suffering that they display on the field. So we'll just get one of those over.
Well, he did look when he came back on. As I said, he didn't look hampered. Well, I've got that serious MFCSS and all this, and I'm just expecting a tweet from the club at any second with the worst news. But that's just another day living in my head that's constantly shrouded in negativity. Big man, how good was it to see the cavalry in the form of a 6-goal premiership hero return to save the day?
Oh, well, I just, for one thing, if I would have a picture on my wall of him kicking the football, I reckon, if I was
Better than a Picasso.
It's like a bit too much information. But like, how great is it to have a Melbourne footballer lining up for goal and you feel extreme confidence that he's going to kick it, and it just his kicking was just beautiful. It's like he's taken no time off whatsoever. He's slotted straight back in. A point George made a few weeks ago about 𝗟𝗯, actually, I think, coming back into the team is, again, credit to our high performance team to come back in and have that impact. And so his goals were obviously a highlight, but I reckon it's really important to note he was our highest rated player on the field. So he averages 8.6 a game. He's 20.1 his player rating for this game was. 108 Supercoach points for those who do Supercoach. Time on ground, 71%. So he is on, a fair whack given, that he was off getting his foot tended to. He had 16 disposals. Disposal efficiency up around 70%. This is the number that jumped out for me. 401 metres gained for a forward. That's seriously impressive, which tells me he got up the ground a lot. Like it's all teams, all players have to do that sort of all-team defensive running. But that's something he's been criticised over the journey for a little bit. So, but what that tells me is he's super fit. If he's getting up and down the ground, he had 4 inside 50s. Again, he's playing outside 50s, getting up the ground for a player who starts pretty much in the goal square. 4 of his possessions were contested, which for him is, good going. Took 4 marks, 5 goals straight, so 100% accuracy. Had 7 score involvement, so only 2 more than he only gave 2 off. But the thing that I also liked is he had 2 tackles, and that's something that George has rightfully criticised. Melk for before, and me at different times of Fritter. And the other thing I really love about him is he brings a real positive energy and vibe to the team. And when he kicks goals, he really gets up and about. And he must have some claims to be the most underrated footballer in the AFL, I reckon, because where was the talk in the media about a star forward coming back into the team? It was almost as if, he's a good player. He's scored the most goals in a premiership season and last year as well, but, he will certainly help. He's a flat-out star, this kid. I mean, so awesome to have him back. I think hopefully his foot's right because he just brings just class and silk to that forward line.
when he snaps for goal, I'm very confident. I mean, he's a
Right, or
guy
left.
that just
And one of those snaps was on his right foot, I'm
he
pretty
just
sure.
knows where the goals are. It's just natural for him. Like Petrarca, when he has a snap, I'm never confident that he's gonna kick it. But yeah, Fritsch, absolutely. But speaking of Petrarca, that's our next go-to. Dr. Gonzo says, more a comment than a question, but how much do you love this team? They never feel out of the game, and brute competitors like Viney and Petrarca just seem to will things back in our favour when the going gets tough. We may not be the classiest team in the league, but we are certainly the toughest, and that is something I've thought I'd never say as a D's supporter. I bloody love it. Supreme Demon adds, I thought Christian Petrarca really made a huge impact in the second half when the game needed to be won. Do you think he will get some Brownlow votes? Is he still a sneaky chance to win the 2023 Brownlow medal? I reckon he'll get votes in this game. Our leaders really stood up when it counted. Track was just a bull in the second half. After a pretty fumbly first half, I must say, from him, in terms of whether he's in Brownlow contention, I don't know. I think it was Nick Dacos's Brownlow to lose. Say what you want about Nick Dacos, but I think that's the way it is. He went down. When he went down, he went down, and I just don't think Track has done enough in that time that Nick Dacos hasn't been playing to get the votes. And if it's not Dacos, I think maybe the Bont will have earned enough votes in the past few weeks. Track will probably be in the 3rd to 5th range is my guess. I just don't know if he's done enough in the past few weeks, and he'll get votes on this weekend. And if he's within 1 or 2 come the last round, then hopefully he's definitely one of the best in the leagues, as the coaches' votes will attest to. And if he's within touching distance, they haven't shown the coaches' votes as I mentioned for the last 2 weeks, but I reckon he could get in the 9 or 8 to 10 range this week. So hopefully, George.
Yeah, he's certainly in contention for Brownlow votes. I mean, Brownlow votes are given out by umpires for a start, so most of the midfielders are the ones who are going to win it. Clary's been out for a long period of time. He's the one who's more likely to take it away from him. Jack Viney, we notice, but I don't know that the umpires notice the amount of work, the sheer grunt that Jack does. Max hasn't had a great season by Max standards. Even the All-Australian people have noticed that.
Don't get me started.
Yeah, we'll talk about that soon.
We'll talk about that later, or else we'll be here for another hour.
Jackson, bloody get.
Yeah, I know. No action, Jackson.
Yep.
But
as far as Track, he's a good chance to be up there. Simply because Clary's been out for so long. Clary was fantastic in the first half of the season. I think Bontempelli's the one who's. I think, quite honestly, he's the best player in the league at the moment, and he hasn't got many people to take votes away from him. No. So that's my guess at the moment. But Track will certainly be up there,
and partly for the same reason as the Bont is that he's kicking goals.
Yeah,
makes a big difference. And so you remember that goal, like you mentioned, he turned that game when he kicked that low dart, that goal. That's when the game started, going back our way. He was in rare form, and I don't think he's even in his best form yet.
No.
So
he's ready to rip a game apart, and I think he did it in that third quarter just to get us back in the game. He's got that capability that very, very few other players have. You go back to the Dustin Martins and what they were capable of doing. He's in the same class.
And as a basketballer, he was very high, very elite basketballer. Grew up, loving the NBA. In the NBA, it's all about the finals and about you leave your reputation in the finals. And the same is true in footy, I guess, as well. Like Dustin Martin's performances in finals is what elevates him above so many other players. And that's what Track wants. And, I mean, he's got a Norm Smith. So, pretty good start to his career in the finals. So, can't wait to see him Thursday week.
In regards to quick ball movement from our oppositions, it's time for another. Has a question for Bimman. I've been able to see the last 2 games live. It seemed to me that when the Hawks, then Swans, got on top, they did it by moving the ball quickly and often short passing, and it was effective at dodging our zone defence and avoiding our contested superiority. My feeling was in both these matches we were able to cut out their possession game and turn it back into a contested D's game by, amongst other things, switching to more one-on-one defence than zoning. What is your view? If you agree, I wonder what the mechanism is for making this switch. Is it player-driven or the coaches? Yeah, Matt.
I don't think they go to swap to one-on-one. I think what they do is maybe there's a little bit more direct accountability, but what they generally do, particularly around those uncontested possessions, is press up hard and shut down the space, not allow Goulden to suddenly, get the ball and run 20 metres into open space. Press up hard, and that's where the pressure rating comes in, because you get that's the corralling and getting in front of them. A run down behind also gives you pressure ratings, and combined with that it was really noticeable actually in this game is they really and we talked about the data, all that data that we were talking about in that from the halfway 20-minute mark of the third quarter to the end, is we went through the roof with our tackling, which is partly what George was noting before as well. Is so I don't think it's we don't go away from our zone. It would be counterintuitive to do so, because that's our strength. You don't give away your strength. I think what we do is close down their space, but get up in their grill, basically, and we make them earn every kick. And I've used this analogy all season and last year, is like that rowing analogy of upping your rating. We up our rating in that period of time. We up it a lot in a short period of time, and really, it was really noticeable in that game. That's why it was so thrilling to watch. You could see it. You could see the players' intensity lift and go harder at the opposition, smash them. Not give them any space. There was a mistake one of their players kicked. He had plenty of time to get rid of it, but he was clearly thinking he was about to get smashed. That referred pressure that you see. So my sense is that they up their rating, and in terms of whether it's a player-driven thing, it is a player-driven thing, because once the quarter starts, the coaches can't do anything. There's a limited amount of times they can send a runner out. And I think that's exactly what Goody talks about when he talks about and lauds our leadership. That's what he's talking about, is an ability to change the momentum of a game. Nibbler was interviewed after the game. It's on actually Hearts Are True, 3OW. If you catch up radio, you can listen to him. He's very thoughtful about it. And he was asked about that. And he said, well, look, we just smashed in. We needed to lift. He was asked about his leadership. We needed to go harder. And he said, what I was going to say earlier actually is we didn't win the game when we kicked the 4 goals at the end in the last quarter when we rolled over the top of them. We won the game when they only kicked 3 goals when they had momentum. And that's what Nibbler said. He said the first thing we had to do is to stop their momentum. And there was this dead period of no scoring, but that was us lifting our rating. And Nibbler talked about that. He said once we stopped their momentum, then we could turn it our way and we could start, putting on some scoreboard pressure. So the first thing is to take it away from them and then put on the scoreboard pressure and take advantage of the momentum when we have it. And I think that's Goodwin's signature coaching thing, is that this team's ability to stop oppositions taking advantage of momentum is huge. And so I think it is player driven, obviously within all the systems and the training that they do for exactly this moment. And I think it's our point of difference over all of the opposition, all of the contenders, our ability to prevent teams getting away from us. Other teams when, would have, exactly like I said about Carlton in the first quarter last week, most other teams would have given up 4 or 5 goals and the game would have been dead. And I'll go back to what we talked about last week. Our losing margin in our 7 losses is we're only averaging 7 or 10 points a loss. If you take out the 27-point loss to the Bombers, it's something like 7 points a loss. So, we stay in games because the opposition don't get, don't take it away from us. And that's, to answer that question, I think that's totally player driven and leaders.
So the next question sort of about extras at the contest versus extras behind the ball. Dr. Gonzo asks, what did you make of some of the structuring in the first half, particularly allowing Swans +2 and 3 at the contest while we had +2 and 3 behind the ball? Was this due as much to Sydney putting extras around the contest as us putting extras behind the ball? Was it an insight into how we will structure up in September? Was it more to do with the length of the SCG or the fact that we wanted to play more of a slow, keepings off style in a dead rubber rather than a physical contested game? If the latter, it didn't work as it was a bruising affair, but a good lead into finals. I think a better lead in than the bruise-free training drill that the Pies had. B-Man, perhaps this is another one for you from a tactical perspective. What did you notice in regards to that?
Well, one, that's what we do. So that's Melbourne's, that's how we generate the free intercept player. That's, at the heart of our game. We're in fact ahead of the curve because now, as we've talked about all season, intercepting is the key scoring for the contenders, for the real contenders. It's scoring on intercept and turnover is where you win and lose the game to footy now, not clearance numbers anymore. So, of course, they're important. But we generate an ability to have an extra in defence by having one less at the stoppage and allowing the opposition. And the Swans do that all the time, bringing extra to the stoppage. And in this case, they were bringing a couple. So if they bring 2 extra to the stoppage, that gives us 2 free players that we choose to put behind the ball to mop up any ball that comes forward, hopefully a rush kick. What was remarkable, so there's a question later about media, is that I would have not known that if it weren't for Burgoyne pointing it out a couple of times. He was the one that pointed it out. I don't know why they don't talk about this every week and explain to the viewers what's happening and put a graphic on to show how many people are at the contest, because Burgoyne pointed it out twice, and he was the one who pointed out we, in fact, had 3 extra at one point. The opposition do it to beat our midfield, to win the clearance, and that's what Collingwood do. They bring an extra to the contest. We back our Bulls in to split it. So what was remarkable that at halftime, despite being 2 down at contests and late in that second quarter, 3 less at stoppages, I should say, not contests, in order to have we had our players behind the ball. I thought it was genius because it fed our intercept game. But we were +7 for clearances at halftime, despite being 2 less players at the at stoppages. That's nuts. And in that half, we scored 3 goals, 5-23 from 18 forward half clearances, despite that numerical disadvantages at stoppages. That is really impressive work from our midfielders. It's incredible, really. It's giving up 2 less players at a contest and still, winning contest and winning clearances. The D's had 8 more clearances across the first 3 quarters, and eventually the Swans pegged it back a bit in the last. That's partly because 𝗟𝗎 spent time on the bench. But I point that out because 8 more clearances when you're playing 2 to 3 or sometimes 3 players down is unbelievable. And we're not going to lose many games of footy when we can have the luxury of having 2 less at a stoppage that we put behind the ball and have 2 players free to mop up and intercept. At one point, the commentators were talking about how come Melbourne have got so many players down on the goal line. Remember they were rabbiting on about that? That's because they're not up at the the stoppage that just happened as it got kicked in.
So you're saying that we're not having as many at the stoppage and trusting our intercept game. And all right, if we win the stoppage, we get it forward. But if we lose it, we're backing in our intercept game, and then we're very good on the turnover. So we're
not
backing
just backing
that in.
If we allow the Swans to bring 2 to a stoppage, we can put 2 free players in our defensive zone. So when the Swans win the stoppage, they're kicking into a numerical disadvantage
and then hence
their forward line.
We then turn over,
then
we go and we know what to do once we've got the ball.
Exactly.
We know how to spread and transition well.
Flank.
Yes.
Exactly. We score from the back half. And that's the problem for the Pies, because the Pies bring an extra to the contest as well, which leaves them defensively vulnerable. And that's their major vulnerability. We don't have a defensive vulnerability, but it's dependent on our midfield being really up and about. Otherwise, that's what happens in the middle of the season when we're fatigued from loading, is that we still run short. We still run less at the stoppages, but we get beat more often because they're fatigued.
And it's another sign of the old style of playing versus the new style. You're going to score more from intercepts than what you are from contested stuff. But if the Swans wanted to play that way, well, so be it. It suited us beautifully.
Yeah, and that's what you're hearing more and more, Georgia. Your commentator saying, "Oh, well, that's what Hoyne's talking about a lot. Is that if you don't have a turnover game, you're not a contender."
Yeah.
And that's why he's talking about the Dogs. They don't have a turnover game. The Swans don't have a turnover game. The Saints, better, but they still, not the same sort of turnover game we have.
You made a mention of Burgoyne noticing some things that other commentators don't, and I think that's the benefit of having a current day player. He's only a year out of the game over dinosaurs like BT who just have absolutely no idea what they're rabbiting on about.
Absolutely. So he's actually really improving as a caller. I really like him. But there was no commentary about that. That's a huge implication. He mentioned it 2 or 3 times, but no one picked it up and ran with it, which I thought was weird because it was fundamental to how the game played out.
Yep. Couldn't agree more. Oh My D says, don't think the club has gotten plaudits from being able to make top 4 with a tough draw and arguably one of our worst years in terms of injuries. The ability to win 16 games despite having key stars out for key periods of the year, including Petty, T-Mac, Oliver, Fritsch, Brown, Salem, Gawn, 𝗦cie, 𝗏𝗏𝗀𝘀𝗁, Smith and now Melksham is remarkable. Injuries play a huge factor in a successful season, and despite the horror run we've had, we've still found a way to put a good team on the field. Our high performance and rehab teams deserve a lot of praise, in my opinion. Gaundy the Great answers, I know there are many ways to measure the difficulty of the draw, but if we go by the teams we played and the amount of wins that they have had, I think you'll find this was one of the easiest draws compared to the other teams. And you know what? I guess it's difficult to judge and compare the draws of certain teams. The difficulty of one's draw is going to differ at the start of the year when we get the draw handed to us, and then again in hindsight when we look back at it. And there's also the unevenness of in terms of how many games you get interstate and how many 5, 6, 7 or 8 day breaks, whether you get an actual bye week that we certainly haven't got the last 2 years, how many times you play the bottom teams or how many times you play the top teams by the year end. And even when you play certain teams, like I would have loved to have played the Cats at the start of the year or the Bombers at the end of the year. And injuries certainly play a part too. And despite the questions on our forward line that we talked about throughout the whole year, with a 5th highest scoring team, and all this despite never being settled up forward as a result of the injury carnage sustained throughout our forward line throughout the whole season. And 𝗟𝗶𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 a guy on Twitter who's a stats guy, is great follow, by the way. He produced a ladder of the top 8 teams versus each other in 2023. So I'm not sure if you've seen this, but Brisbane have played 10 games, 8-2, 113%. Collingwood 10 games, 6-4, 115%. Melbourne 10 games, 6-4, so even with the Pies, but 113%. Port have only played 8 games against the top 8 teams. They're 5-3 and 99% percentage. Carlton 11 games, so they've played the most, 5-6, 93%. Saints 9 games, 3-6, 93%. GWS 9 games, 3-6, 84%. And Sydney 9 games, 2-7 against the top 8 teams at a percentage of 87%. So George, any thoughts on the toughness of our draw, the hand we've been dealt with injuries and interstate travel, our permanent residency in the Bellarine Peninsula, and whether we get the kudos in the media?
No, I think you summed it up all quite beautifully there, Andy. The fixture, the draw, whatever you might like to call it, at the start of the season is not what people expect come at the end of the season. In all honesty, and it was proven by the number of teams that were dependent on results in the last week or two of this home and away series, is that apart from 3 teams, basically everybody else had a chance to be playing finals at some stage. Even Essendon, with I think it was 5 rounds to go, were inside the 8.
Oh, 5th.
So yeah. So every and how do you account for that in a draw that's done, at the end of last season? So
with the FIX being in capitals,
yeah, yes, yeah, exactly. But there's no such as, and Goody said this, man, there's no such thing as an easy game these days. Even against the bottom sides, they can come out and perform on the day. West Coast and North, and probably Hawthorn were below the level of everybody else. But
West
there's no
Coast,
easy
West
games.
Coast ended the Bulldogs season. So there you go.
Exactly. That's exactly. And who's to say that the teams in the eights are actually the best teams at the end of the season? Adelaide should have been there. The Bulldogs could have been there. So we haven't had an easy run. And you can only play what you've been given. It's as simple as that.
I think we've had a pretty good draw this year, and I think critically our run home. That's been the thing, is that I've been talking about this, how just full on footy is now. Like, it's just so full on, and we can see it with the Pies. Like, they're struggling to the line, they're paddling. Like, so all of these teams now really need this pre-final bye. I heard Track interviewed on 360 was asked about it last week. Would you prefer a pre-grand final bye or a pre-finals bye? And he looked pretty weary. He said, well, maybe if you'd asked me, he's had both, because we got a pre-grand final bye. So he's one of the few players who can actually answer this question with some lived experience of it. But he said, look, I'm really looking forward to this week off. And so I think it's been really helpful, our last 6 or 7 games, in the sense that we haven't had too many back-to-back really full-on games of footy. So I think we've had a reasonable draw. As for the media's just waking up like in a bad sort of collywobbles hangover at the moment. They've been in a fever dream all season about the bloody Pies. And now they're suddenly dropping down people's power rankings and seedings. And I'm hearing, commentators and saying, oh, well, actually maybe Melbourne. Partly I think that the club eventually, they don't mind it. I've heard Nibbler said this, they don't mind being underestimated. So they're happy for no noise, and they're happy for the focus on the Pies. Good for the club.
Let them have the pressure.
Because, I'd like my club to get a bit more respect in the media, but that's, as George said a few weeks ago, it's we're not as click-worthy as the mighty Pies. But
Deceiving says also more a comment than question, and a topic that's ripe for a bin man rant. Looking forward to this. Not unusual by any stretch, but how somber were the commentators once Melbourne got on top late in the third and right through the last quarter. I know a famous Swans victory at home to farewell Buddy was the order of the day, but you'd swear they were commentating a funeral towards the end of the game. They basically laid out on making any comments for some outstanding play, for example, Track's goal and Nibbler's holding the ball tackle, and said nothing of the Melbourne's effort, strength and determination to win in hostile territory. Now, with the exception of special comments from Daisy and Silk, the commentary I thought was disgusting and probably downright disrespectful. BT was outright barracking for the Swans for most of the game and was almost gleeful in his commentary on our injuries. Deceiving's absolutely right. He was almost somber at the end once the D's had the game sewn up. And big man, I know you like a rant about commentators. And you've just sort of said that. How did you find it this week in this game?
Well, look, as I said at the top of my show, you got me in the change rooms afterwards and said, look, you've got to show some more discipline. So I'm not going to rant this week about, not for that topic, but I agree. It was a bit of a weird vibe. I thought exactly like you said, it was a bit of funereal. Is that the phrase? So I think they were it's like I was saying last week, that the Seven and Fox, like the AFL, they're addicted to controversy and drama. And they had seen weeks out that this final round of footy was going to be the final round of footy to, the greatest round of football ever. And they didn't get it. This game didn't, have a huge lot riding on it for us. And they couldn't build it up. They couldn't find any way to build it up. BT's just so hopeless. He doesn't do any research. Like, he asked a couple of times about which foot did Frida hurt,
You should know that.
Well, why don't you know that? Like, why don't you prepare before the game that you're calling? Darcy, I find he's hilarious. I have to be honest, I'm not a huge Daisy fan as a commentator. I don't know what the deal is, whether sort of a caller or special comments. Burgoyne for me was the one that stood out, but it didn't. I've actually, tried to ignore it. It wasn't so bad, but it was quite a weird vibe. It certainly, they couldn't find the energy to. They couldn't work out what the game was. But later that night, David King, he's a tripper. It gives us this huge pump up on first crack, like a massive pump up. He's all D's this, track is awesome. Our defense is, you can't get through it. It's incredible. And at the end of the show, they all gave their prediction about who would be the premier and who would be playing it off. So he's given us a massive, massive pump up. And after the Hawks game, after we beat the Tigers, he changed his tip from Collingwood to Melbourne and fully on the Melbourne bandwagon. So he's given us a huge pump up, picked us as a flag winner only a couple of weeks ago. He's been ragging on the Pies about their defensive vulnerabilities now, talking about the Lions not running out games. Somehow he arrives at the D's not even making the grand final, that the Pies would be premier, would beat the Lions. We wouldn't even make the grand final. And then to top it off, he says that 75% of the tickets sold. So he said it again on Monday morning. That what you tweeted out was on the radio this morning. He said this last night, that the Pies fans should get 75% of all tickets sold because as the home team and having finished on top by 3 games, they've earned the benefit of a pro-Pies crowd. I mean, whatever he's on, I want some of it because –
Be mad, you've just spoiled my next bit that I was going to surprise on you. Because whilst you're in rant mode, I was going to play a clip for you, and I will still play it. And it's from your favourite AFL pundit, as we've just heard, David King, who thinks that Collingwood should get the advantage for finishing first, and more so because they're playing another Victorian team in week 1 at the MCG. So take it away.
Before you do it, Andy, on the first crack, the only reason he said it was like some thought bubble that came out of his brain. They were talking about that St Kilda should get their home game at Marvel, which I think they should. I mean, why are they playing that game at the MCG? It's ridiculous. Anyway, that was the context. And then he just says, well, that's Collingwood, should get 75%.
Well, let's play him at Vic Park. Here we go.
What do you want to do with the crowd for the qualifying final, Collingwood versus Melbourne?
Well, there has to be something. If you're going to finish top of the table and play a team that effectively has the same home ground, I think there has to be some advantage. For Collingwood finishing top of the table, Melbourne finishing 4th, there's no spoil. I think when you finish top, when you play at the same venue, it's a neutral advantage in a final series. The team that finished high up the ladder should have 75% of the crowd. The crowd should be the advantage. So 75-25, and no bluing Melbourne, because you had your chance for 24 rounds to find yourself in the top position on the
bluing Melbourne.
And your home final is the next one, either a semi-final or a preliminary final. That will be your hosted final.
If Melbourne played a Carlton, then they would have 75% of the crowd on Carlton.
Right,
I think you have to have some advantage for the
hasn't
same
thought
venue,
any of this through,
cancelling out any advantage which you've built over a marathon season. I mean, it's just wrong that Collingwood and Melbourne 50-50 MCG week 1. There's got to be more in it than a McClellan Trophy or something. That means nothing. I would, if Collingwood had 75% of the crowd next Thursday night, it would be a huge advantage.
I don't recall him suggesting this last year when Collingwood finished 4th and Geelong finished 1st.
I reckon he's had a bet on the Pies, because why would you pick the Pies over the D's anyway? That's the silliest thing I've ever. I can't even begin to say how stupid that is. Like 75%, how would they do that? How would they count it up? Like, sorry, we're at the 74% threshold. We can't accept that ticket, Melbourne fan. You have to wait until your 25% allocation.
Well, it's just allocation, I guess.
Ticketek with their brilliant systems and skills, I'm sure they'd be able to.
Well, I don't know how you work it. It's more just the member allocation. They can't control MCC. They can't control AFL and check who you're a supporter of. None of that. So and corporates. So anyway. Bigfoot says, and this is on MFCSS, just popping in to check on Andy's MFCSS levels this week. The Melksham injury is devastating. Seeing Bayley hobble off the field and Bowie come off with his arm like it needed a sling. I can't imagine Andy's blood pressure and heart rate was in a good state, and I must admit neither was mine. Love all who work, 5.5 stars. Now, for any new listeners, and I know there's many new ones on board, and they always say if you doing a show like this, you should always reference anything you're talking about that people won't know about. So I hope you're enjoying the show. The MFCSS, if you're new, is an acronym for Melbourne Football Club Supporter Syndrome. It's coined well over a decade ago on Demonland.com for the veil of negativity that pervades the thoughts of many Demon fans, that nothing good will ever happen to the Ds. And we thought Premiership would cure that, and we assumed that would be the end of the dreaded MFCSS. But some things never die. I've got a terrible case of it, as you can probably tell. And after the Tigers game, I thought we had found the answers of our forward line. Then Petty goes down. Melksham's been in great form. Bayley Fritsch makes his triumphant return. Then Melk goes down with the ACL and Freda hobbles off. 𝗟𝗀𝘀𝘁𝗃 goes down. There was one thing we really wanted from this game, and that was to get through unscathed. And I don't know if we have yet. MFCSS, what can I say? I'm legitimately dreading the injury report this week. So, that's all I'll say about that. So, through the roof.
Check out make yourself feel better and follow the Pies injury reports.
Do you know what? That's the opposite, because then they got 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝗀𝘀𝘁 Moore coming back, and the Nick Dacos will make a miraculous recovery this week.
I hope he does.
And not that you wish injuries on anyone, opposition or whatever.
Hamstrings,
but then you see, like in the game, that Rowbottom for them, he had one arm, he couldn't even lift it. And I was like, well, were they going to take him off? Is he going to go off? And he kept just having one arm. He get tackled, he got hurt again, stays on. Yep. So Luann on Facebook sent us a DM and wants the answers to a few questions. And Bimman or George, I think George, you want to take this. You're probably you guys are the best to answer this rather than myself. So here goes. Luann says, "Hi Andy, I have a few questions for the three podcast gurus. If they are appropriate and you have time, please excuse my AFL ignorance, but I've been a Melbourne supporter for 63 years, but have only just recently started to give the AFL my whole attention after a lifetime of coaching netball. It drives me nuts that I don't truly understand AFL strategy. A couple of things that I'm dying to get an answer for. Number one, I would George, do you want me to just take this point at a time or read through the whole thing?
Go through the whole thing. It's all tied in together.
All tied in together. So, so number one, I would have thought that defenders determine which players they pick up in the forward line. However, I've heard commentators saying it was clever coaching putting Bayley Fritsch on 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝘀𝘁 Moore in the Pies win earlier this season. Is this right? Wouldn't the defender just pick up the player they want? Number two, what exactly is meant by whole team defence? Number three, what is meant by territory game? And number four, are there any stats to show how much influence a particular ruckman has on which team comes away with the ball after a centre bounce? Love, love, love the potty. Thanks to all involved. Kind regards, Luann." George.
Firstly, I'll leave the statistics question about the ruckman to Bin Man later on if he's prepared to run with that one. I think part of the problem here, without knowing who Luann is and how long they've been going to games, but given that you've said you've got a netball background, where in netball, basically it's one-on-one. You've got goal attack on goal defender or whatever the designations are. So, and they're limited in the area. So you've always got one player playing on one. So the defender's always playing on the player they're assigned to. AFL's completely different, of course. There's players coming on and off the ground constantly, which isn't the case necessarily in netball either. And it's developed a zone defences based on what basketball has been doing for a long time. Basically, in the zone defences, you have players who the defence is set up so that the whole of the defending side, or the back six as we know it, move as a team to cover the space rather than going for individual players. So what I was talking about before is, yes, if you see Stephen May moving up the field, you'll see Daniel Turner sliding in behind to cover the hole that Stephen May makes. But what it also means is that the player doesn't necessarily stick to their own man, like we saw in AFL for well over 100 years. You move to cover the ball as it comes into the defensive zone as best you can. So the player who's closest to it attacks the ball, regardless of where the defender is. You'll be leaving your defenders, but it requires that everybody work together as a team, filling the holes that are left. The people have to have faith and confidence in the rest of the side, the rest of the defenders being able to cover the space that's being left because you move out to where the ball is present. So it's completely different from what you see in netball. It's completely different from what was played up until I first noticed zone defences around 2017, 2018 in any serious manner. Not all teams, even today, play zone defence because you've got to have the right sort of combination of players and you've got to have the right sort of skilled players to be able to do so. So the bottom teams generally have got one or two decent defenders, but you need a decent, probably a really solid back six to be able to run it effectively, and we run it more effectively than pretty well anyone else in the competition. The territory game is one that's developed as a result of the zoning that occurs. You've got to move the ball some way up the ground. Contest after contest is what we used to see in years gone by. Probably only in the final series. It's now played in every single game. So when you get the ball, you've got to get territory. You've got to get it down the other end of the ground. And you've probably seen with our own players like Oliver and Petrarca kicking the ball much more deeply into the forward line, whereas before people to be looking for a short pass or a little chip and things like that, you've got to get the distance with the possession that you've got. So territory becomes far more critical these days than what it was even a couple of years ago. The defenders, forwards also will pick up people as they need to stop the defenders trying to intercept the ball, because as we've seen and just talked about, intercepting and scores from intercepting are a critical factor in sides which are basically up the top of the ladder. So you'll see sometimes a Melksham going to a 𝗟𝗏𝗀𝘀𝘁 or a Fritsch or someone like that, because when they're playing the whole team defence structures, you're trying to trap the ball into the forward line when your forwards are working. But the other question was about the whole team defence. That occurs when it's not just the back six. You've got all the forwards, the back six, all trying to cover the area, stopping the movement of the opposition through the field to get to their own forward line. So it's a bit in basketball. It's a little bit like a half court press. It's not the full court press, which becomes more of a one-on-one. It's more of a hard court press. It's denying the opposition the opportunity to move into space, because if they can't get into the forward 50, then they're not going to score goals. So you limit their ability to do that. So that's why we talk about the whole team defence. Does that cover off everything? And I'm sure Bin Man's got a few bits to add.
And just on that, I mean, if that clip I was talking about before, I forget, I think must have been late in the third or perhaps it was in the fourth, but it not only with the whole team defence denies or limits their ability to attack. So to go through the corridor, for instance, you'll see Melbourne players if you freeze the frame, you'll see Melbourne players in the centre forcing, that if they do take that kick on, it's high risk. But the major thing for Melbourne is that it stops them moving the ball forward in the way the opposition getting territory in the way they want to, and forces them to often kick down the line to Max Gawn. So not only aren't they moving the ball they want to, or if they do, they risk a turnover. If they choose not to do that, they end up playing into our hands by going in straight lines and kicking to a contest. And there was a really good example of that where that's the one I was talking about before, where the commentator said, oh, this is almost like soccer, forcing them back towards their own goal. That's that all-team defence, I think, is really the difference now between, probably 5-6 years ago. That's, again, what Tigers brought in. That question about the ruck, in terms of who are seeing the benefit, there is stats. I think you can probably get stats on each player, but there's general stats from scores from centre bounces. So in this game, actually, interestingly, they scored 20 points from centre bounces, and so that's probably all 𝗍𝗍𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗍 getting them. So 3 goals, 1 they scored from 3 goals, 2, I should say, we only scored a point from our centre square bouncers. Now, 5 years ago, that's the difference, isn't it, George? 5 years ago, you weren't winning games of footy if you were only scoring a point. I remember we lamented a few years ago on the podcast our inability we dominated tap outs and clearances and couldn't score. We were 19 down on differential in this game and still won this game of footy. That's the change. That's because we scored 30-odd more points from turnover. So centre bounce was, you can see that. And so on Demonland, there's a thread that's updated every week, stats files, which has got the data from each match. And it's got a summary of where the scores are from, including the centre bounces. I'm just looking, that's really low, isn't it? So, but also where the scoring chains start from, which part of the ground. So there is data available on the effectiveness on ruck. But, I'd probably, that's been one of the biggest shift in footy is ruckman's influence in terms of creating scoring chains is so much less now than it was, say, even in 2015, 2016.
Let's move on and talk about the Thursday night scheduling of our upcoming match. Red Jacket says, I know we're not supposed to talk about the Collingwood game this week, but surely we can take a moment to talk about the scheduling of the match on the Thursday night. I realise that the match has been scheduled for the Thursday night so that whichever one of the Ds or Pies loses on Thursday, they'll play Friday night's winner on the following Friday night and therefore give the higher ranked Pies/Ds, hopefully the Pies, the extra day break over the Blues/Swans, hopefully the Swans, for a matchup. However, Thursday night is a horrible night for access to the footy for those like me that live in the country and for the kids who have school the next day. The AFL and their broadcast partners strike again. So Red Jacket makes some good points. What do you guys think about the Thursday night scheduling? Bidman, followed by George.
Yeah, I mean, I take all those points as, Friday night's the big one, I would have thought. I don't have any sense, I'll be going to the game,
Yep,
so it won't
course,
bother me. I don't care which night it is from that perspective.
Yeah.
But all of those points are really valid points. Like in terms of obviously this is a 7. They wanted a big game on Thursday night, but I find it a bit weird that I know the logic because the following, but why would not play us on the Friday? Like that's the big game.
That's when it's
Sydney,
always
Melbourne,
been.
Collingwood's.
Well,
Melbourne Collingwood's. This is one of the biggest games of footy for 30 years. I would have thought. I mean, it's the first time we've played them in a final since '89. Pies are up and about. They finished on top of the ladder. They're playing the mighty D's at the MCG. I thought it was a no-brainer for Friday night from a ratings point of view and telecast and all of that stuff. I find that really strange. From a positive point of view, putting a sort of positive reframe on it, one really good thing is that it's one less day for more to get up. 𝗍𝗀𝘃 too, but surely 𝗍𝗀𝘃 is not going to be ready. They were talking about 6 weeks being prelim final day. But even if there's any talk about him getting up, it's one less day for Moore and 𝗍𝗀𝘃, but particularly Moore. 𝗍𝗀𝘃, as I said, be touch and go. But Moore won't be. He'll be right on the bubble of playing for the 3 weeks of his hammy industry. So one less day, it's not like he's going to be able to ease into it. And it's going to be a cold, chilly Thursday night in Melbourne. So from that perspective, one less day for them to get Moore ready and Murphy, and he's been struggling, and Mitchell, who's carrying stuff. So, I think it's good for us.
The other consideration about this particular game, we were lucky in the way that it's fallen in the sense is that we didn't have any concussions. If we had a concussion in the game against the Swans, that player would not be available.
It's 11 days
for the Thursday night.
Imagine if Tracker had gone off with a scat test and it comes back that he's got a mild concussion.
It's only 11 days from Sunday.
That's right.
Yeah, I wouldn't be nearly so calm if one of our players, particularly a key player, had got a concussion. And that again, it just really just throws up the questions about what I was saying before about the fixture. I mean, they're putting, they have a pre-finals bye. The whole point of the pre-finals bye is to maximise the likelihood you get quality games in the first round of finals because every team gets an opportunity to rest players. Well, how fair would it be if that same system knocks, like we can't get say a Petrarca or a Gawn because there's a concussion and they schedule a game within the 12 day window. It's mind-boggling, really. I mean, I heard about that. I didn't want to get angry ahead of time, so I'm just bloody pleased that, MFCS, there'll be a late head knock that comes to light.
Just wait for the injury report tomorrow. That's my nightmare. Let's talk All-Australian squad. It was released today. It's a squad of 44 players. The Demons who finished fourth on the ladder only had 2 players representing Christian Petrarca and Jack 𝗍𝗍. Track we would have expected, and Jack 𝗍𝗍, we know he's had a stellar season, probably his best. I reckon he's in career best form, as in blocks of games that he's put together. So that's very well deserved. I guess some Melbourne players that missed out, Max Gawn, and maybe Stephen May. You could add to that as well. That might be it. Was there any other players from the Ds that you would have expected to get a Guernsey but didn't?
I'm shocked. I'm totally shocked that Gawn didn't get in the squad. I mean, I take the point that he missed 4 or 5 games, but I mean, he won 3 or 4 games, like, for the club. I mean,
you've got in terms of ruckman in the team. There is Luke Jackson, Rowan Marshall, Tim English. Just looking down the list, I don't see any other ruckmen. So they're the three ruckmen who have been named in the squad.
I think this was a case of let's give a little bit to everybody in the whole competition, because there are players in for example, Hawthorn with Luke Bruce. Give me a break.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
So, I mean, Hawthorn have...
Jai Newcombe make it? Is he?
Yeah, Jai Newcombe's in there. I'll read the players. Yeah. Adelaide, Jordan Dawson, Taylor Walker. You can see that. Brisbane, Harris Andrews, Charlie Cameron, Joe Danaher, Lockie Neal.
Joe Danaher.
Joe Danaher.
Carlton, Patrick Cripps, Charlie Curnow, Jacob Wiedering. Collingwood, Dacos brothers, Jordan De Goey, Darcy Moore, Isaac Quaynor. Essendon, Kyle Langford, Zach Merritt, Mason Redman. Fremantle, Luke Jackson, Luke Ryan, Caleb Sarong. Geelong, Tom Stewart. Gold Coast, Noah Anderson. Giants, Caniglio, Green and Green. Hawthorn, Bruce Newcombe and Sicily. Melbourne, Petrarca 𝗍𝗍, Larkey for North, Port Adelaide, Butters, Rosie and Houston, Dustin Martin for the Tigers, for the Saints, Marshall, Sinclair, Wilkie, Swans, Blakey and Goulden, West Coast, Oscar Allen. Come on, they've just given a player.
He's it. I mean, I'd take him.
Don't do how good he is. Has he had such an outstanding season for a team that's won 3 games? Come on.
Yeah. Even Dustin Martin for Richmond, how many games was he missing?
Yeah, that's right.
Missing.
Had a good end to the year, but come on.
How could he get in and not go?
Well, Gawn's had just as many good games as him.
Leaving aside, I think it's a really two things is that it just feeds into the narrative that Goody will love. We're the underdogs here. Yeah. We're constantly, disrespected, although not nearly as disrespected as the Saints, I have to say. But the thing, though, just is that it really emphasises how strong our system is. 2 All-Australians in that, there's been years we've been not able to make the 8 and we've managed 2 All-Australians in a squad of 44, So it really emphasises how well we're going as a team in some respects, that we can, go into a qualifying final. We'll start favourites in this game. I'll bet my bottom dollar with only 2 All-Australians in All-Australian squad.
Every other finalist, I think, with the exception of Sydney, has more than 2 players representing.
I'm surprised they didn't name 43 Pies players in the squad of 44.
They tried. They had the most with 5, and then the Bears with the Lions with 4.
They'll make Dacos the captain probably.
And the team I left out was the Bulldogs, Bontempelli, English, and Liberatore.
Well, on a serious note, I hope Bontempelli is made captain. He deserves it. I agree with George. I think he's the best player in the game.
All right, let's just quickly talk 𝗟𝗍. Demons made an emphatic statement in winning their VFL wildcard match by 101 points over North Melbourne at 𝗟𝗍 Fields. The victory, however, did come at a cost as the team lost its most prolific ball getter in Luke Dunstan, who limped from the ground before half-time after amassing 17 disposals with what appeared to be a serious knee injury and has since been confirmed as an ACL. Tom McDonald was marking everything, finishing with 5 goals, 2 from 17 disposals and 9 marks. Brodie Grundy was strong in the ruck and dominant all over the ground, ending the game with 33 touches and 18 hitouts and 10 clearances to go with his 3 goals for the day. Along with T-Mac, Andy Menzies-Wakefield also had a field day with 4 goals, 1. James Harms and Charlie Spargo, 24 and 17 touches respectively. You can read the full match report by 𝗟𝗍 from 𝗟𝗍 at demonland.com. I can't remember which one of you said you watched the match.
I saw most of it. The one that you missed out there was James Jordan, who had 36 disposals as well. I think he was easily the best player on the ground. Look, the opposition wasn't much at all, North Melbourne. The game was as good as over in the first quarter. Grundy absolutely dominated the ruck. With 33 disposals and 10 clearances. You can't ask more than that. T-Mac had a party up forward because nobody could go with him, and he was just leading out and taking marks and kicking goals. It was as simple as that. So Andy Menzies-Wakefield, 5 goals as well. James Harms tried to think he was Dustin Martin with all his fend-offs and failed in most of them, so I don't think we'll see much more of James in terms of trying to get into the side. Charlie Spargo had a sort of game. I think he only had 17 touches, but he certainly wasn't anywhere near as vital as he was the previous week. The difficulty is, with the our game now on Thursday night, can we afford to play any players who might be in the selection window, or do we, if a Grundy or a T-Mac is due to come into comes into the side, that means you're going to cut them out of 𝗟𝗍. So it's going to be a difficult decision for the selectors this week with what they do. But it was hard to take a great deal out of this match because we were just so completely dominant.
How did T-Mac move, George?
It seemed to be very, very free, moving very freely, both laterally and in a straight line. So it was good. He was, if we needed a forward, he'd be the man. He didn't need to move far up the ground in this particular game. It just wasn't the need. But he seemed to be moving pretty freely.
That's really pleasing because, as I said, I saw him at the Carlton game at the Icon Park for the VFL, and he looked miles off it. His lateral movement was terrible. In fact, he looked like he was carrying a bit of condition, and so it's brilliant. 2 weeks. I want to go on his fitness plan to come up in 2 weeks. So that gives us such a huge. It's remarkable, given all of our problems with defenders, that we've now got an option to bring in a player who's a premiership player into our forward line if we want to go down that route. And Grundy, he's still a big body, and he sounded like he had a terrific game. He was moving well as well. I mean, his lack of pace bothers me a little bit.
Yeah.
So I wonder, Ben Brown obviously didn't play. So that 1 week injury or whatever that he had a couple of weeks ago, doubt we'll see him for the rest of the season. I mean, it was probably a given, I think
the way things are going, Ben's career might be over. That he hasn't been able to come back from the injury, and no prospect of it. And he's been given plenty of time away, and we haven't been pushing.
He played in the VFL. It'd be 3 or 4 weeks ago, wouldn't it?
Yeah, easily 3, and probably 4.
Yeah, I'd like to see that the club either gets someone like Brown or Melksham back, if they're going to hang up the boots now. I wouldn't mind either one of them to be some type of forward coach and get in, and I know someone gave big raps for Greg Stafford, but I would love to see someone who's played forward in the modern game as a forward get the gig down at the D. So won't sort of count chickens before they hatch. Neither.
Ben has been spending some time with the girls.
Yes, he has, and
over the last couple of years.
So he's obviously done his coaching, certificates, and they'd continue to educate him in that. So I wouldn't mind seeing that happen. Someone with Ben Brown's abilities, understanding leading lanes and leading patterns and all that. I wouldn't mind keeping a guy like him at the club in the role, considering he's done this apprenticeship with the girls. So I wouldn't mind that. Changes. We're not doing any changes as a preview this week. As I mentioned, we'll leave that to our podcast next week, where we will do an extensive preview of the qualifying final against the Magpies, including all the changes and matchups, and perhaps we'll even look at some of the other games and teams that are playing in the first week of finals and give our thoughts on who we think are contenders and who we think are pretenders, because as you know, our predictions are rock solid. We might have to, we will be revisiting at the end of the year our predictions at the beginning, and I'm sure we'll have egg on our faces. Guys, I think we're going to leave it there. We've done a longer podcast without doing changes and previews than normal. So
that's George.
That's George. So we'll be back next week, as I said, to bring you our preview of the massive contest against Collingwood in the qualifying final. If you want to listen to the show live then please head on over to Demonland.com on Monday night at 8:30 p.m. Thank you to our 5-star reviewers on Apple Podcasts. Thank you to Blimit, 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁, Jester 666. It's time for another. Thank you to Luann on Facebook for her great question. And your questions and comments, they're an integral part of the show. So thank you to our Demonland posters who submitted questions and comments. Thank you to Scroll, Track Forever, Demon WA, Supreme Demon, Go Lordy, Red and Blue Rising, Rue Bruty, 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘁𝗁, Smurf, Red and Blue Beard, Lazy, Lefty, Wells 11, Travie 14, D Old Fart, Bay Riffin, Mr. Freeze, Engorged Onion, Prestige D, Oh My D's, Chook, 𝗟𝗶𝘀𝘀𝘁, Dr. Gonzo. It's time for another. Gaundy the Great, Deceiving Bigfoot, and Red Jacket. Thank you to my co-hosts, George and B-Man. Thank you to you, our loyal listeners. And don't forget, leave us that 5-star review and a comment on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcast from. We'll read it out on the next show. And don't forget, check out our YouTube channel to watch the show. Just search Demonland Podcast and please like and subscribe. See you next week. Go Demons.
Go Red Leggers.